Good evening. This is the February 28th, 2023 regular meeting of the Board of the Palo Alto Unified School District. The board met in closed session and took the following reportable action. The board voted 5-0 to reassign employee HR 022823-127 to a teaching position for the 2023-2024 school year. Can we get an approval of the agenda order?
I move that we approve the agenda order.
Anyone? Second. Yes, I do.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And I probably should have done you guys first. Student board preferential vote?
Aye.
Aye.
Wonderful. And we had unanimous here. Okay, so let's start with our student member board reports. Mr. Pan.
Okay. Hi, everyone. These past few weeks still were very busy for GUN, even though it was just 2 weeks ago. We had our Love Week where students could go to the senior quad for a lot of different activities, such as writing letters and chaining them together, getting married, and more. To end the Love Week, GUN had its Valentine's Dance. SEC also hosted its Spring Sports Rally this Friday, where spring sports teams talked about their goals for the season and other details on how to join the teams. GUN's Staff and Choir musical was also very, very cool. I went and I had a lot of fun. The performances gave me actual goosebumps, and you could tell that they actually put a lot of effort into all of their events. GUN's Career Speaking Series was also last week, where different speakers from different occupations spoke to GUN students about any questions they had about future careers. Free pizza was also given to the students for attending. GUN also hosted its racial equity training, where teachers and students listened to speakers and attended different workshops in the library to understand different ways they could help with racial equity. There was also a more specific equity training for different clubs called the Affinity Equity Training, where different student groups were trained in more detail. Some events are coming up. GUN's robotics team is traveling to Utah to qualify for Worlds this Wednesday, and they're pretty confident that they can, so good luck to them. Prom Reveal will also be on March 7th, where students can go to Spangler Theater to watch a video SEC has prepared for them to reveal the location. And I'm happy to say that I helped write the script for the video, and it's very, very awesome. Service Day is coming up on March 8th, where students can volunteer at different sites to help out the community. They are excused for most of the day, but will have to return to class near 7th period. The swing dance is also coming this Saturday. Students can dance to different jazz and choir music, and I've heard that everyone who's went always said that it was worth going. For sports-wise, our dance team placed 4th in nationals last week, and our gun wrestling team was 2nd at CCS, which are both very, very impressive feats. But that's all for me today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Sia.
Thank you. So here's the tally update for the past couple of weeks. As we have seen yesterday and last week, we were pulled back into winter with high winds, cold, and rain. Unfortunately, many students and staff lost their power, but despite the weather, our events persevered. Pally Activities had a packed weekend with Mamma Mia, our musical, loading in their sets and beginning tech rehearsals, speech and debate students claiming victories at the Tournament of Champion online competition, and our cheer team as well, competing in the USA Cheer National Tournament in Anaheim. ASB began our annual review of our Constitution, as well as allocated the money from our Stanford Game parking fundraiser to multiple clubs and teams that worked the weeks. ASB also hosted a primetime guest speaker, Stanford professor Michael Snyder from the Department of Genetics, who discussed genetics, medicine, and biology. ASB has started our spring event committees, which include staff appreciation, quad concerts or quad certs, specifically we're doing Quadcella, and our Pally Play Week, as well as continuing to plan for prom. Our cultural committee reps also met with PTSA to plan our international night. Senior season is upon us, with seniors hosting their spikeball tournament this week, even through the rain. Senior superlatives winners being announced by our yearbook team, Madrono, and senior elimination and events being in the works. Our Black History Month continued with Lisa Gothier, the EPA mayor, speaking at the Haymarket, and our Mardi Gras Festival being held last Wednesday with lots of beignets served with chocolate and caramel sauce. Our freshmen also completed their course selection, with the freshmen on team going to the California Academy of Sciences for their field trip. Additionally, our spring sports have started their first games, with badminton having their scrimmage last Friday and track having their meet tomorrow. Looking at our Pally Social Justice Pathway, or SJP, There were students who went to Angel Island last week to learn about the immigration process for Chinese settlers, and 4 juniors from SJP will be heading to Washington, D.C. With the Muweka tribe to talk to Congress and lobby for them to reestablish the tribe's federal recognition. Continuing with this advocacy, this week, the RISE student consent education facilitators are hosting workshops with 9th and 10th graders and presenting on how to identify unhealthy relationship signs and learn the definition of consent with the video Amor del Bueno, which is a film made by Latinx students in the Marin County. I did one just today. I think it was really informative, and it's really great that it's student-led. As for our upcoming events, students are gearing up for numerous tournaments. Speech and debate have their state qualifiers this weekend, and robotics is also heading to the Utah Regional. The Science Olympia team is also heading for the regional next weekend. So we're wishing the best of luck to all of our competing Pali students. Thank you.
Wow, thank you both. Okay, superintendent's report.
Okay. As we look at the importance of committees and some of our ad hoc committees and other groups, I always go back and review not only our current but some past committee findings. And I was going to read you a few pieces off of a PAUSD committee called Program and Curriculum Committee. Okay? And before I jump in, I want to make sure everyone understands I'm reading from the report. These are not my own words. Okay, but from this report, the PAUSD Program and Curriculum Committee, this first one's rough. And parents today seem to need to make their children brighter and more able than the competition to have super kids. It has led to the miseducation of young children. They identified major issues finding around elementary education. And they had a couple questions. How can the PAUSD elementary schools, and especially the classroom teacher, cope with the continuous changes that are occurring at the elementary curriculum caused by changes in the California state framework and an ever-increasing body of research and information on education? How can we determine what is developmentally appropriate curriculum for all children? Whenever possible, early childhood programs should include before and after school care for children who need this care. Every middle grade student should pursue a common, comprehensive, academically oriented core curriculum, irrespective of primary language or ethnic background. Maximize, these are recommendations, maximize heterogeneous groupings. There's a reference to a Harvard education letter that states that ability grouping, in quotes, laning, does not promote achievement and self-esteem for the vast majority of students. When looking at our high schools, the group identified 3 areas of need: the need to establish a philosophy of inclusion, the need to provide authentic alternative approaches to meeting educational goals, the need to recognize the many symptoms and causes of student stress and alienation. It's a pretty interesting report. It was surprisingly written and submitted on September 26th of 1988. And as I read this report, just for some context, at that point in time, this school district only had 7,556 students. They're very proud of the advances that they had done in the area of technology because they had 485 computers. Today we have 10,500 students and 17,000 computers, so we've decided now that we need more computers than people. Some parts of the report have aged better than others. There are some statements made throughout that report in 1988 that would be cringeworthy now, but some other things are exactly the same issues we are confronted with today, all those years later. For additional context for our student board reps, in 1988, I was a senior in high school. I had hair and everything, it was amazing. It's been a while, and yet some of these issues are front burner for us right now. The same things we are talking about. What does inclusion mean? Their number one goal in this report was a goal around equity. And it was worded very similar to the way we are using it now, with some of the same data points that concerned them then in 1988. So as we start to chip away at some of these topics, you're going to hear about some of these later tonight, I just don't want to lose the impact that we are still facing some of the exact same concerns. But tonight, you're going to see evidence also of places where we have made progress that has not been made since before 1988. And I just don't want to lose that focus as we move forward. So my report tonight comes from a very old document, but I think in some ways very timely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are going to start open forum, and we have many speakers, so I believe that mathematically that gets us to 1 minute per speaker, right? Someone correct me if we've got over 20. And I mean, based on our most recent update to the minutes. So I'm going to start, as usual, with students that are in the room or students that want to comment for open forum. And then after that, we'll alternate between people in person and on Zoom until we get through the list. So I'll try to call out 2 or 3 names at a time so you can be on deck and be ready to go. And we are going to start with our first 3 students are Maya Prakash, Theo, you're going to have to tell me if I say it wrong, Theo Waktuk, and Tony Minion.
Hi, and just to apologize, the 2 other people had a bit of a car breakdown on the way, so they'll be here in a couple minutes, but I'll just start off. Hello, my name is Maya Prakash, and I'll be joined here with Theo Waltuck and Tony Minion, and we're all juniors at Gunn High School and members of the Palo Alto Student Climate Coalition and the Social Justice Pathway. We're here to comment on the bus electrification efforts that have begun, and I want to start off by congratulating the district on getting our first 2 electric buses, and we're here to encourage the district to continue on this path with very specific intent, and we're here to encourage the district to pass a mandate stating that all future school bus replacements will also be electric. The 3 reasons we wanted to get into for this, the first of which being student health. And of course, we all know that diesel emissions are really bad, but there are a couple of studies that show just how bad. To start with, the US Environmental Protection Agency found that diesel school buses can worsen illnesses and have a very direct impact on student respiratory health overall. And my partners will continue later.
Okay, thank you. We'll keep an eye out for when they get here, and thank you for keeping it to a minute. I know that's hard. It's not a lot of time. So we will skip over 2 students for now. Let me just make sure there are no other students down this list. There are not. So we'll go to the top, and we'll start with Rowena Chu in person, and then Edith Cohen on Zoom. Okay, we'll come back to Rowena. The next person in person is Yang Chu, and then we'll go to Edith Cohen.
Oh, closer to my mouth. Okay, thank you. I would like to talk to you about the impact of the math placement practices in middle and high school. My son is currently in 9th grade. When he tried the Skip 6 test, he did not pass, even though he was doing math several grade levels above. His 6th grade teacher asked him and then asked us to stop asking questions in class.
Just pause for a second, let's get the mic fixed. We can hear you, but they can't hear you.
Just in case we might need them. Extra batteries taped to the top.
If any speakers brought their own batteries.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, we'll hand out extra time for that.
Okay, test that out.
Can you hear me?
Much
Okay,
better.
great.
Okay.
So his teacher asked him and then asked us to ask him to stop asking questions in class. Even though he had very interesting questions, he was asking about things that were beyond the curriculum, and he was intimidating and demoralizing the other students. And those are the words of his math teacher. We moved him to a private school for 7th and 8th, and then when we inquired about coming back to 9th, We were told he would have to pass a test to be placed at a level that's a year below where he was at the time. So he currently commutes 3 hours a week, 3 hours a day to go to school. This is not fair for him. It's not fair for students who can't afford to go to private school, and it's not fair for the students who are working hard to learn in the same classroom as kids like him. Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Edith Cohen, and then Rowena's not here yet, right? Okay. Edith Cohen, and then Stephen Davis. Miss Cohen.
Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
So, okay, thank you. Post-mass placement practices were found to be in multiple violations of state laws designed to protect the interests of students and society. Post was faulted for systematically holding back students that are ready to advance and lack of transparency and on options and results. The court order addresses high school, but unfortunately our middle schoolers remain subjected to the same non-evidence practices that seem driven by biases and beliefs. I request the board to agendize and address the issue. The middle school math experiment is in its third year with no results reported. Over half our students are grossly misplaced in math classes, 20% utterly unready, and 35% already proficient and held back. Is this working for anyone? The data tells us it is lose-lose. Our disadvantaged students and our non-disadvantaged students are both objectively worse off compared with peers in Los Altos and Cupertino. Both these districts offer evidence-based flexible pathways.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. You can, if you have more to say and you run out of time, which is very possible with our 1-minute limit, please feel free to email the board your full comments at board@pausd.org. Next, we have Stephen Davis in the room. And then after Stephen Davis, we're going to go back to the students if they're ready.
Good evening, board members. First, thank you for including the special ed report card and information on inclusion that I got from the California dashboard and the Department of Education in the board package. 2, the district's proposal last week does not meaningfully restructure our special education program. It modestly rearranges it and in the process treats students and their families like widgets moving between warehouses. Our special ed performance program has a gap that's growing between its special ed and general ed kids, not shrinking. We can do better. We can move to a single level of special education classroom. The mild mod and mod severe separation is a bureaucratic artifact. I've got more details in a written note to you all. And then we can form a district community task force to do better for our special ed kids. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you. We did get that email from you. Theo and then Tony, correct? Yeah. Okay, great, come on up. You've got 1 minute each, sorry, talk fast.
Okay, no worries. All right, hi, I'm Theo Walchuk. I'm with BEEP, Bus Environmental Electrification. Proposal. I'm sorry that we're late. We had some technical difficulties getting here. So the point that I want to touch on is environmental impact of switching to electric buses. Transportation is the #1 contributor of emissions in the United States, and so switching to electric would be super beneficial just from an environmental standpoint. School buses are a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions in the US, producing over 5 million tons in greenhouse gas emissions, and currently only 2 to 3% of the US's school bus fleet is electrified. But since Palo Alto is such a trailblazer in terms of environmental action, if we switch to electric buses, then the rest of the United States will kind of follow in our footsteps. Palo Alto's SCAP is making strides towards sustainability, and so it's really important that we continue to take these steps. Also, really quickly, I just want to touch on student health. I know Maya talked a little bit about that, but we just think it's very important that the school board is prioritizing student health and these environmental impacts over all else. Thank you.
Thank you. So last one is Tony Minion, right?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, I'm Tony Minion, and I want to talk about the third subpoint we have, which is cost. I know there have been some concerns about the cost of electrifying our bus fleet. We did cite the study, and we'll send out a transcript of what we wanted to say later so you can have access to this. But the study basically concluded that although upfront costs of electric buses are higher because gas prices are so much cheaper and because there's reduced maintenance costs because electric buses have a lot less parts than diesel buses, what we're seeing seeing in the end is that the district is going to save up to $10,000 in the long run per bus that they switch to. So I guess with these 3 subpoints, I know this is a little shorter than we wanted to, but we would really love to get on the agenda so that we can discuss passing some sort of mandate that would urge the district to, every time a diesel bus gets out of commission, to replace that with an electric bus. So yeah, we would really love to get on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go back to Zoom, Sunny Paul. And then in the room, we will go to Yaroslava Krivikon.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Yeah. I want to bring the attention to the math placement test in middle school. In the past, board members have been proponents of heterogeneous class with 2 main stated benefits. Firstly, it promotes equity. In the real world, above grade level students from resourceful family either send kids to private schools or provide supplemental education from tutors or RSM. This leaves kids from non-resourceful families at a disadvantage. The second main advantage of heterogeneous class told to us is that it is more effective. So basically, a 7th grade is more effective if it comprises of below grade, at grade, and above grade students. Let's build on that concept a little further. This would mean a random selection of kids from 6th to 8th grade would be more effective than the current students of 7th grade. This ideology would also suggest that we should not have any grade levels in middle school, as a heterogeneous class is much more better. Expanding on this a little further would also mean that we should not have any syllabus as well. Students can just randomly hop into a class and be more effective.
Mr. Paul, I'm sorry, that is your time. Please feel free to send the rest of your comments to board@pausd.org. Thank you. Next, Yaroslava. And then Mahorti Davidi.
I would like to update you on the progress of special education restructuring. This week, I visited 2 school sites to take a look at the mod severe learning centers. The special education teachers were very welcoming and showed us their classroom. However, when I asked the staff to show me the general ed classroom so I could take a look how the inclusion happens of special ed with general ed, I was told that Amanda Boyce specifically instructed the staff to deny us that request. Why? At the video meeting where Amanda Boyce announced this program restructuring, she stated that Ohlone classroom is being moved to Nixon and not vice versa because there were only 7 students in Hannah's class at Ohlone versus 22 students at Nixon. Imagine my surprise when I walked into Nixon today and found out that in fact there are only 9 students currently in the mod severe class, 2 of whom will be graduating to middle school and 1 of whom is leaving the school this summer for other reasons. This leaves 6 students at Nixon who will remain compared to 6 students who will remain at Ohlone. It's a tie. Furthermore, we were told that Nixon is a better facility. It is old, it is not inclusive. The program is located in the farthest corner of the school in portables, which are temporary structures. That's what they were built for, temporary use. And what happens when Nixon's numbers increase? Sorry, there's no more room at Nixon for expansion. You know, this program will be cut from Nixon as soon as enrollment goes up again.
Thank you. Next, we have Madhuri Davidi, who I believe is on over Zoom. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, hi there. We enrolled our daughter at Gunn High School and then finally decided to enroll her at a private school because of the math curriculum. I spoke to Dave, and then he told us that even though she is advanced, she has to go take the geometry class. And then, you know, we decided that it would be very ineffective for her, especially, you know, with the tech industry and where things are going, people are doing AI and all that. I really wanted my kid to be good in math. So, you know, I think Gunn disappointed us a bit. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. That's it.
Thank you very much. Next, Rowena Chu in person, and then Pavlina, I don't have my glasses on, Apti? I can't tell if that's a T or no.
Hi, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak again about the special ed changes. My name is Rowena Chu. I'm an Ohlone parent. I have been for 6 years, and I will be for another 6. The points that I want to make tonight, I don't want to reiterate those points eloquently made by the parents of Room 19. What I'm here to say is I've heard many views over the last 2 weeks since about 20 of us from Ohlone came to speak at the first PAUSD board meeting. And in summary of all the very divergent views that I've heard over the last 2 weeks, I want to say that this point remains, and it's extremely important. I think the issue of removing access from a protected and vulnerable community to the special and distinct educational philosophy that is Ohlone is incredibly important. And I think some of that's getting lost in the shuffle in discussions of geography and sizing and numbers. I think that...
Thank you, Ms. Chu.
Thanks.
Next, we have Pavlina, and I'm sorry if you could say your last name because for some reason I can't. I think it says Apti, but I'm not sure. Are you there? Is that person logged in? Yes. Okay, we'll give it a second. Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, just a moment. Hello, this is on the topic of math placement tests in middle school. My two kids are in middle school. The older already took the skip test twice. The MDTP test was easy to pass, but like the vast majority of the test takers, he did not pass the second test. I'm aware that the second test is designed locally in our district and is not validated. Very small percentage of students are allowed to accelerate in math compared with the neighboring districts that use validated tests. My 7th grader refuses to give up and wants to take the test again this year. I would like to see that math placement for students that feel ready to accelerate is done using a validated test. And, or if a student completes a math grade using accelerated program outside PAUSD, it should be recognized and used appropriately for math placement. Please place this as an item on your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, Maria Brown, you are next. Sorry, I didn't give you a heads up. After Maria will be Avery Wong over Zoom. And then Mark Vincenti is here. I didn't even see him. Okay.
Good evening. I'm here to advocate again for our special education students. These last couple of weeks, we've been focusing on this consolidation of a portion of this population, the Montsevere group. We've been hearing from families and staff about some of the trade-offs in limiting the number of schools where these services are available. We've been hearing about the limited choices, so a neighborhood school no longer being an option, a choice program no longer being an option, inclusion not being an option in all of our schools. This is not okay for our vulnerable population. It's not okay for the students or the families. How are we supporting them? How are we giving them a choice? And how are we including them in the conversations before making these decisions? Another quick point I want to make is my understanding is that many students don't get identified as they enter kindergarten. It may happen later. So then what happens then? Do we uproot them and move them into one of these 5 schools out of the 12? And what makes this population vulnerable is also their numbers. So if we're kind of playing the numbers game, then that worries me. I think we can do better. In Ohlane's case, that would mean hiring staff to split up our existing Montsevere classroom and keep Ohlone truly inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Avery Wong on Zoom, and then Mark Vincenti.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I would like to report egregious and systematic cheating on that test. In the 2021 Skip 7 test, the Part 2 test was so hard, only 3 kids in the entire district passed. Perhaps part of the reason was that the test was advertised as 3 hours, but called at 2 hours with no pre-announcement as to the time being reduced by an hour. But that's not the worst of it. In my analysis of the Skip test results obtained by public records request, not 3, but 18 kids passed. 15 kids who scored below the ironclad rigid threshold were allowed to pass. But that's not the worst of it. I also discovered that the kids who passed were not according to a ranked order. For example, a kid with a 72% failed, but a kid with 50% passed. In Palo Alto math, this means that 50 is bigger than 72. This is cheating. This is fraud. This is not a calibrated, fair, transparent, and objective test. It is a mockery of a process that determines a kid's future. Palo Alto has, in my view, lost all credibility and goodwill in home baking and administering these highly controversial skip tests. PAUSD must implement a fair, objective, transparent, and externally sourced
Thank you,
standardized
Mr. Wong. You can send any additional comments to us at Board of PAUSD. Is Mark here in the room? Yeah, I don't see him. Okay, we'll come back to him. So the next person in the room is Nicole Chu Wong.
I'd like to speak on the math issue because I've done a fair amount of speaking to people in the community. I'm also a new parent with young children that I hope to have go through the entire school process here in PAUSD. And two things to me are clear. The first is that the factions around math within our community do not serve our students, neither do lawsuits. And we need to find common ground by focusing on serving all of our students and having intentional discussions about the community values that we want to foster here. And the second thing that is clear to me and that all parents on all sides of the factions have agreed is that mental health remains an issue in our community, as well as equity. And so whatever discussions we have around math, I think we need to factor both of those things in. And while there may be some world in which we move to a different test and allowing some acceleration, we need to ensure that those students that are accelerated are ready, both academically and socially, and also take steps to combat anything that may do in terms of increasing the culture of the arms race of acceleration within our district and how that doesn't serve our students for their mental health or their future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next over Zoom is Sally Espinoza. And then if Mark is back, we will. You didn't see him? Okay.
Hello. My daughter is Naomi. She's an 8th grader at Green. I also have a senior finishing up at Pally. I'm speaking on her behalf, really. Naomi is a female and partial, person of Hispanic heritage, and so wanted to make sure that people take the perspective of a child who has been bored in math ever since entering middle school from private school, took the skip test and failed, has continued to be bored. We've actually enrolled her in a geometry course just to keep her interested, which she's on her way to scoring, very good grades in. And we now ask that she not be asked to repeat the same geometry course in freshman year, that the board allow and the school allow an option for her to be placed in the class that's appropriate. I find the kind of dichotomy of making this about equity and mental health, honestly, a little bit of a false dichotomy.
Ms. Espinoza, that's all the time you have. Can you send the rest of your comments to us on our email, board@pausd.org. Thank you. I don't think there's any other commenters in the room. The rest are on Zoom, so we'll go down the list. It just says Arabi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. I'm here to request you to put middle school math placement on the agenda. The middle school math validation test has been non-transparent, unfair, non-standardized, and has been misplacing students. This has been a mental, it is a mental issue for many students. It can be. Around 2016 to 2019, the 6th grade validation exam was given in the first week of school with no prior notice. No student or parent was notified about it. Also note, there was no way to be placed in 7th grade math. It was placement to 8th grade algebra 1 straight out of 5th grade or nothing. In 7th grade and 8th grade, you were invited to take a test only if amongst other rubric entries, you completed a 100-question set every month on your own with no help from school. In 2019, suddenly the 100 questions were not a criteria anymore. In 2021, a two-part exam was introduced, of which one was still a non-standardized PAUSD exam, made exam. At this time, placement 2 grades ahead was discontinued. But it was...
Oh, okay. Thank you. You can send your comments to board@pausd.org. Next is Marianne Marr, and then Allison Rosen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm an Ohlone parent and co-chair of the BIPOC committee at Ohlone. I'm calling in to speak about the move of mod to severe students out of Ohlone and Escondido, and I stand in solidarity with the parents in the room tonight. I can't help but think this controversial shift is part of some larger plan to do away with choice schools in Palo Alto altogether. If this sounds absurd, and I actually hope it does, it's still indicative of the confidence folks have in the district these days. Second, my area of expertise within the realm of education maintains the social construction of disability. What this means is that disabilities and learning differences are not fixed, rather fluid and ever-changing. So a student with mild disabilities or learning differences might have to switch schools at some point if their needs change. Has this been factored into the plans? Has this been communicated to parents? Because this not so indirectly impacts parents of children with mild modifications as well. At the center of this decision are children who've experienced massive upheaval due to the pandemic. And just as they and their parents now settle into a routine,
Thank you,
finally
Mrs. Moore.
breathing.
Allison Rosen, then Michelle Higgins, and then Sarah Woodham.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I see Michelle Higgins and Sarah Woodham are finishing us off. So Lena Russell asked me to speak on behalf of her child. It's a 7th grade at Green Middle School. I just want to say this math needs to be put on the agenda. You can see that there are mental health costs here in this kid. He took the skip test in 5th and 6th grade, had a perfect score on the MDTP, and your uncalibrated tests keep failing kids. There's no feedback on what they need to study. And this kid is passionate about math. Since early elementary school, they've given him supplemental math. This is what the kid wants. He's not being able to do his karate classes. He's bored. He feels it's a waste of time at math. He realizes he doesn't belong in the classroom. He resents the amount of driving that he has to do to external math because that's what challenges him. He wants math. This year he's bored. He spends his time doing outside math homework and reading. He has an A in math, of course. So really, mental health means intellectual challenge.
Thank you, Ms. Rosen. Next, Michelle Higgins, and then Sarah Woodham.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Fear has taken hold in Palo Alto schools, and we are seeing that expressed tonight. The academic arms race has swung into overdrive. Parents are being given the message that our top-ranked school district is providing a subpar education, and it is necessary to enroll elementary children in school after school math classes like the Russian School of Math. The express purpose of these classes is acceleration by as much as 2 to 3 years beyond their peers, and always with an eye on the end goal, admission to a highly selective college. What are we doing to our children? With this in mind, it seems like a good time to revisit the words of former Pali student and 2015 school board rep Caroline Walworth. We are the product of a generation of Palo Altans that so desperately wants us to succeed, but does not understand our needs. We are not teenagers. We are lifeless bodies in a system that breeds competition, hatred, and discourages teamwork and genuine learning. We lack sincere passion. We are sick. We as a community have completely lost sight of what it means to learn and receive an education.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins. Finally, last comment for open forum is Ms. Woodham.
Hi. Oh, hello. Am I on?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi. I'm Sarah Woodham. I'm hearing, this whole narrative around skip tests, skipping math grades, most conspicuously devoid of teacher voices. If I were a new parent in the district with young kids, I'd be panicked and looking for insurance against a defective curriculum sequence. So I kind of wanted to speak as a parent of 2 alumni kids to younger parents out there. The bottom line is, there are improvements that could be made, but our kids will be fine traveling through normal pathways charted out through 8th grade without tutoring by default. High school math meets the range of the full spectrum of kids in PAUSD. In my opinion, even without skipping excessively through the grades. I fear that what we're teaching our kids in this drive to outperform each other to an artificial endpoint of undergraduate college acceptance.
Thank you, Ms. Woodham. That time is up. You can send your comments to us. Thank you. Okay, that is the end of open forum. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. onto the consent calendar. These items are considered routine and will be approved in one action without discussion. If a board member requests an item to be removed from the calendar or a citizen wishes to speak to an item, it will be considered under action items. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, student preferential board vote?
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Consent calendar is approved. On to action items, 5A. Dr. Austin?
Yes, we're going to turn this over to Ms. Chow.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. I'd like to first start out by giving the board just some brief background on this item and then follow up as to where we are today. So at the beginning of the month, the current market rates were favorable in terms of refinancing our 2013 GO bonds. The present value of savings on these bonds was over 3%, and we started the process of preparing the documents for refinancing these bonds in order to capture some savings for our taxpayers. On February 21st, we met with the property committee, and the savings had shrunk by about a third. As of last Friday, the present value savings fell again and were below 2.8%, which 3% was our threshold, which made the refinancing simply not optimal at this time. So given the market fluctuations, staff is recommending that we move forward with the resolution so that the district can be prepared to move forward quickly should market conditions move in our favor. So tonight, this item, we are recommending that we waive the two-meeting rule and approve the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, she stole my thunder. I was going to say first we have to waive the two-meeting rule if that's what we're going to decide to do. And if I don't know if anyone has any questions for Ms. Chow. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I have to push to talk now. I guess I'm surprised to hear that there was a window because it seems bizarre because interest rates are so much higher than they were in the past. The idea that we could refinance to save money. I guess the idea that we're trying to give blanket authorization to catch fleeting windows of refinance opportunity seems odd. Usually those windows are either open for a long period of time or they're not. And it's like, so I'm a little curious what the idea is. I've never heard of, having investment bankers like checking the ticker every day to see is today a good day to refinance and just doing, it just seems out of the ordinary. So I'm wondering why you're proposing this as opposed to just waiting for conditions to change and if they become more favorable, bringing it back at that time.
So the reason that we're bringing this now is because the bonds are now callable. So roughly every 10 years they're callable. So we are able to refinance, and when the market conditions are favorable. When we first met with our financial advisor at the beginning of the month, they were favorable. The window doesn't stay open forever. So this resolution would be good for 60 to 90 days. And then at that point, if the market conditions didn't turn in our favor, we would simply let it expire and wait until the conditions return to those.
Okay, so just to clarify, because that was helpful clarification. You're asking, is it 60 or 90, do you know?
I think it is a little subjective after 60, so I would say 60 to be sure, and possibly 90.
Does the resolution, is this in the wording of the resolution? It gives a specific...
That was on advice from bond counsel.
But I'm just asking, is it in the wording of the resolution that it's a 90-day authorization or?
No, it's not in the resolution.
So I'm sorry, so where does the 60 to 90 day, Ms. Little-America is indicating she might know the answer here.
No, my understanding was that bond counsel was saying under the law, any resolution that we pass, there's no time limit in the resolution, but that the law allows the resolution to exist for a certain amount of time. Is that right?
That's correct. The time frame was from on the advice of bond counsel.
Like I believe.
I guess I'm uncertain about this. I apologize. I probably should have researched this more carefully before the meeting. But I'd be happy to see this come back and maybe get my question answered about whether we need to put a time. I don't feel comfortable giving blanket authorization to go refi indefinitely. if in fact this is time limited by law, then maybe we can just put it in the resolution, and then it's obvious, and we don't have to rely on people being aware of the law, and it'll just be in the resolution. But I'd be happy to do the work to try to figure that out between now and the next meeting.
Well, let's see what everyone else thinks. It sounds like Property Committee gave it a stamp, so.
Property Committee did.
Do you have any comments, questions? I have no concerns, so I guess we should go ahead and see if we want to waive the 2-meeting rule and see if we want to vote, and we'll either pass it now or bring it back. Right, so the first question is anyone willing to waive the 2-meeting rule? Oh. I mean, maybe no one wants to then, I don't know.
Yeah, I'll move to waive the 2-meeting rule.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, student preferential board vote to waive the 2-meeting rule.
Aye.
Aye.
It was very purposeful. Okay, board members, all those in favor of waiving the 2-meeting rule, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. Okay, so we got permission to waive the 2-meeting rule. It doesn't mean that we're going to pass it tonight. So now we're on to the question of, if someone could put a motion on the table so we can then discuss it. If someone could move the second part of the item.
I move to approve the resolution as presented.
I'll second.
Okay, so we now have the actual passing of this resolution on the table. Mr. Collins has expressed concern that within the wording of the resolution, it doesn't limit it to 60 to 90 days.
So yeah, my request to my colleagues is let this go to the next meeting, which in the normal course it would if we weren't doing the waiver. And I'll undertake the research to at least satisfy myself that it's good as presented, or maybe convince staff that they can slightly modify it to include this time frame that apparently is implicit in the law.
Okay, so Ms. Chow, the reason you asked us to waive the 2-meeting rule was so that between now and the next meeting, if an opportunity presents itself, you can jump on it. Do you think that that's very likely? Do you think, yeah?
So,
Well, I asked you the question, so let me answer.
And that was my question to you as well, because is the need, this was asked for a reason, so if you could maybe expand.
Sure. So the reason we placed it on the timing that we did is to get it before the board as soon as possible, because we knew the market was fluctuating. It was pretty volatile. There's also a meeting of the Fed that is set for March, and we were hoping to time the sale before that meeting of the Fed, when it's anticipated that interest rates will raise again. So we were hoping to have our timing such that we would be ahead of that. Given that market rates are not favorable for us right now, the meeting of the Fed will probably put us further in that direction and, lock us out of the market for the time being.
but I have a proposal, if I might.
Go for it.
So let me put this in the form of an amendment to the motion. So I move that we amend the motion to approve the resolution as presented with a 90-day, and put it in the form of a 90-day authorization. So the resolution will continue to be enforced for 90 days, then Ms. Chow gets what she was looking for today, and we get the 90 days.
Do I have a second on Mr. Collins' amendment?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of passing the resolution as is, except for an inclusion of a 90-day limit from today on it?
Well, hang on, I think first vote on the amendment.
Okay.
Straight vote on the amendment, and then if the amendment
we're
passes,
including
then on the main resolution.
Okay, on the amendment to add a 90-day, essentially same thing, but.
Yes, it
right.
is, but it's just a form.
Friendly amendment.
A friendly amendment.
Yeah.
Student preferential board vote to add a clause that says it's good for 90 days.
Aye.
Aye.
Colleagues, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so that passes. So now in front of us, we now have an amended version of this resolution that includes a 90-day limit. Are there any other comments or questions? Student preferential board vote.
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, okay, it passes. Thank you very much, Ms. Chow. Thank you, Mr. Collins.
Good luck with your rates, Ms. Chow.
This is like
He seems pessimistic about this. Okay, the next one is 5B, and that is for us to take to vote for 6 candidates for CSBA Delegate Assembly. And last board meeting, Ms. Segal recommended 6 candidates, and I think no one had any issue with them. They all sounded good to us. Would you mind reading them off, please?
Sure.
In fact, why don't you propose it as a, I move that we vote for.
I move that we vote for the 6 following candidates for CSBA Delegate Assembly: George Sanchez, Bridget Watson, Jorge Pacheco Jr., Christopher Norwood, Teresa Bond, and Danielle Cohen.
Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Are there any questions or comments? Student preferential board vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Colleagues, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Great. Thank you for doing that work for us. And congratulations to the 6 candidates who got our vote. Moving on to discussion item 6A, second interim budget report. Dr. Austin.
Turn this over to Ms. Chow to introduce our speaker and frame this up.
Thank you again, Dr. Austin. So tonight's presentation on the second interim is for discussion only, and we'll be bringing it back at the next board meeting for approval. Want to take us to the first slide? So when looking at second interim, this reporting period represents changes in the budget since first interim, or October 31st, and January 31st. At second interim, we have more actual data and are reporting on actuals from July 1 through January 31st. So in essence, our period of actual data is growing longer, and our period of estimated data is growing shorter, and it's from February 1st through the end of the year, June 30th. In this presentation, this is in preparation for estimated actuals in June that inform our fiscal position when we close the books in September. So following tonight, it'll be coming back to the board, and we will be submitting it to the County Office of Education for positive certification. This is really the key takeaway tonight, is that the district's positive certification means we can meet our current year expenditures as well as the expenditures in our financial obligations in the 2 out years. Some of the adjustments that we see at second interim are the further analyzation of staffing positions and then adjusting for vacancies beyond what we did at first interim. What is really beneficial at this time is that the 22-23 budget is the first budget that we've developed with since we've implemented position control. Having position control is something that gives me a great deal of excitement, and it also lends confidence in our budgeting, as well as our interim budget reports, such as the second interim. We've been able to make those adjustments and be fairly accurate in that. We've also adjusted revenue based on current information. We met with the assessor's office about 2 weeks ago and have current information which is incorporated into this second interim report on the revenue side as well. We continue to revise our salary expenditures based on the actual versus what we're projecting through the end of the year. And we also look at the other expenditure accounts, such as our 4,000 and 5,000 accounts, which are for service, or which are for supplies and services, and then revise those. A lot of times those are set up at the beginning of the year under a blanket purchase order. And so we analyze those to make sure they are either sufficient and not overstated to carry us through the end of the year. And next slide, please. So looking at the summary of our revenue and expenditures at second interim, we see that the income has increased a little over $4 million, and Ms. Yu will give us more information in detail on the next slide in that, and our expenditures have risen just a little over $1 million. So our net amount is an increase of $3.1 million, bringing our ending fund balance up by 1 million at second interim. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Sharon Yu, our Director of Fiscal Services.
Thank you, Ms. Chow. This is an illustration of the revenue changes from the first interim to the second interim. Our revenue comprises 5 categories. Under the LCFF resources, our property tax has increased from 5.14% to 5.89% based on the last projection we received from the assessor's office. In addition, we receive an increase of $173,000 to our SELPA allocation. Under the federal revenue, federal grant continuously assess the LEA apportionment throughout the year and the staff updates as we receive a revision. Under state revenue, the increases are from the CTE incentive grant program and revenue apportionment adjustment to one-time grants such as arts, music, and instructional material discretionary block grant and learning recovery emergency block grant. Therefore, an equal increase in expenditure will offset this increase in revenue. Under local revenue, we are very excited to share that the primary drivers of these categories increases are the large donation we received from the generous donor towards the Palo Alto High School Library. And in addition, we have an increase in our lease and rental revenue, and these changes are added to the budget as they are received. Similar to other restricted funds, locally restricted revenues will have a corresponding offsetting expenditure. Under the transfer in, we do not have any change in this category. As an overall summary of our revenue, we have a total of $4.2 million or 1.33% changes in our revenue for second interim. In the general fund expenditure in the second interim are projected to increase by $1 million or 0.03%. Our expenditure make up of 7 categories. The changes in the first 3 categories are due to the negotiated 7% salary increase, staffing alignment, unfilled position, overtime pay, hourly pay, and substitute pay. Benefits are calculated as a percent of salary, therefore, when salaries are adjusted, so do the benefits. In addition, we made revision to the offsetting expenditure of the one-time funding, such as the art, music, instructional material block grant, and the learning recovery to reflect the established spending plan for the next 3 years. This adjustment encompassed the first 5 categories of our expenditures. The increase in capital outlay is for the acquisition of the white fleet and the electric yellow school buses. And furthermore, an increase in other outgo and indirect costs are increased contribution towards to our post-employment benefits. These are the funds that we use to provide benefits to our retired employees. And also, in addition to that, is an increased contribution to our deferred maintenance fund. These funds are used for one-time expenditure for maintaining our school premises. What we have in here is the ending fund balance of the general fund. We are projecting to be at $83 million in the second interim. The ending fund balance consists of 6 categories. Non-spendable, restricted funds. This comprises of locally restricted and legally restricted funds. And next to that is the committed. These are funds committed for future expenditure. And next is the assigned. These are funds earmarked for planned expenditure. And next to that is the reserve for economic uncertainties. It's a requirement in the submission of the second interim that we have a reserve that equals 3% of our current expenditures. This number will change as our expenditure change. Lastly, it's our unassigned category. With that, I will turn over back to Ms. Chow.
All right, and that takes us to our 5-year, multi-year projection. As you know, we do 5 to expand our trends on revenues and expenditures. Just to give us a little bit more insight onto that, what we'll be submitting is the current year, which is the first column, the 22-23, as well as the next 2 columns when we submit to the county office and to the state. I'd like to draw your attention to the second line, which is the net increase in the case of the current year of the fund balance. At second interim, we're reporting an increase of $8.5 million. And then in the out years, while those numbers are in red, I do want to caution you to the amounts because the amounts are low, and even in the following year, the 2.7 is less than 1%. So we are looking at this point of having a very closely balanced budget in our out years. And that's what I would say is the main takeaway from this slide. Next slide, please. So this has been shared just last week with the Fiscal Advisory Committee. And in terms of what's coming up next, we have tonight's board meeting is the first presentation. We'll see this again on March 14th, where it'll be presented for approval. Our budget development for our upcoming year budget, the 23-24, as well as all of the LCAP stakeholder engagement is something that happens almost immediately when we return from our winter break and through the spring. And then on May 10th, the governor releases the May revision of the 23-24 state budget. And as we know, we're pretty far along in our budget development. But if there are major significant updates from the state, they will impact our district budget, and we try to get them in just in the nick of time to present them on June 6th for a public hearing, which is followed by the adoption of the budget at our second June meeting. And that concludes our presentation on second interim.
Thank you. As a reminder, colleagues, this is an item for discussion, so there's no vote on it tonight. But does anybody have any questions for either of our presenters? I see a thumbs up. I'm giving you both a thank you. Nothing. Students, do you have any comments or questions? Great. Thank you so much. Okay, it is 7:30. I would like us to move on to our SWIFT report card.
All right, I'm just going to frame up the discussion that we're hoping to have before I turn this over to Ms. Conway's, along with others on her team and in even some other offices, put together a really detailed report for you tonight. What's going to feel a little funny is, while we're going to go through the information in the report pretty quickly, this is really your time to tell us if you think this report is what you want to see in the future, or if we want to make revisions. And we really have not had this conversation as a full board. And it's really important to us that we get that really concrete feedback, because this will be part of our PAUSD promise section in equity and excellence. And we want to make sure it's meeting the needs that you all have too. So with that, I want to turn this over to Ms. Conway to lead us through.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. Good evening, President DiBarenza and board members. Tonight's presentation represents an important milestone for our equity work in the district, as it serves as our very first SWIFT report card of the year. So we are very excited to present some good news, and we're equally excited to present some areas that we found that we probably need to focus a little bit more on that we hadn't initially thought about. So this gave us an opportunity to really analyze data and determine where our real gaps are. So we learned quite a lot through this process, so we hope to inform the board on some of those things that we've identified. Before we move on, I do want to spend some time reminding us all where this all started and why we are doing this work and why it's so important for us right now. This work really is about transforming our system. And oftentimes when we talk about equity, we're talking about what do we have to do to fix a child or fix a student. This SWIFT plan and the SWIFT report that you're going to hear tonight is really about how are we transforming our systems to get the outcomes that we are seeing. So we're shifting that focus a little bit so that we're really working on the key important things around transformation. So our charge initially was to really identify those focus groups that our data indicated we were not getting as good a data as we would hope to. So part of that was looking at the system to identify what things we need to disrupt within our system or do differently or redesign to meet the needs of all students, because the core goal was around building belongingness and ensuring that students felt like they were respected in the school environment. So the challenges we had to unpack was, how do we close opportunity gaps? How do we reduce disproportionality? And mainly, how do we reduce the disparity in outcomes for our students of color, our low-income students, our EL students, and other focus group students we've identified? And when we came up with the SWIFT plan, I'll remind you here of what that looks like, this really was about trying to figure out this way to design this work in a way that made sense to the educators in the classroom, all the way up to the board who had to look at this at a more global level. And we came down to the basic question, and really the only question that matters. Did we make progress? Are we moving the needle? And I'm proud to say that in some areas we are. The first goal that we identified was academic achievement, and we measured that with 4 specific areas, one being the SBAC ELA assessment. And as you can see here, you can develop, like I did, a whole new appreciation of the color red, as you'll see that in the 21-22 school year, we saw that every single group increased on SBAC ELA. Most notable, our Pacific Islander group increased higher than any other group that we saw, all identifiable groups. So we were very proud to see that. We were equally proud to see that our students with disabilities increased by 3.18 percentage points. And if you will recall in the SWIFT plan, we measured progress. We could say progress at 3%. So we are grateful to see that those 2 particular groups increased. We have more work to do with some of our other groups, but they are trending up in the right direction. So no students decline. And as you can imagine, during this time where a lot of school districts are still battling with the impact of COVID, we are not seeing some of those significant declines that we've seen in other districts. Goal 2, academic achievement, we also looked at SBAC math. And while we did not see similar gains in this area, we still saw that our Pacific Islander groups increased by far, had greater increases than any other group. So they too met the 3% indicator mark. We did see a significant decline in the percentage of homeless students meeting and exceeding standards, but I will say, based on what I saw with ELA, the number was so small that even one student could tip the scales on that, but that's still something for us to really pay attention to and look at closely. And we also looked at A to G. This one was somewhat challenging because there are some groups where we know the numbers are not high enough to report, but we were able to glean some things here. And we saw that our Hispanic and economically disadvantaged students increased in terms of their percentage of students meeting A to G eligibility. So 2 groups met the 3% indicator mark there. And all other reported groups remained relatively stable. So we did not see any significant declines during this time. And finally, Goal 1 academic achievement also looked at grades, and there's that beautiful color red again. You will see that the percentage of students in a particular group, the percentage of grades of C or better increased for all of our focus groups, and it increased for all of our identifiable groups in general. So we did see some progress there. And just to give you some context, this measures semester 2 from 2 different years. And then there was Goal 2. This is where the biggest reveal came for us. We learned quite a few things, and we also identified another group we might want to put closely on our radar. We find that the elementary learning environment was largely positive for, in general. The percentage of students in the racial ethnic focus groups who were interested in looking at responded favorably to school climate and teacher relationships, in some cases higher than what the overall average was. Similarly, the percentage of African-American students responding favorably to school safety and sense of belonging was the lowest. So that's definitely something for us to really unpack. You'll see that same pattern when we get to secondary. So there are some things that we need to figure out around school safety and sense of belonging that need more attention. Now, our biggest discovery was really around our Vietnamese, and while they were not listed in our focus group, here's what we learned from that. Because we have included that group largely in our bigger Asian population, we may be missing an opportunity and a need there that exists, and it's hard to kind of tease apart when we are identifying Asian. Please note that students self-selected their own racial category or ethnicity, so this gave us an opportunity to get a little bit of a different look at how our students were performing. It's less of a disparity here, but once you see our secondary, you'll see that it increases. And I'm sorry it's kind of dark, but I can point this out to you where our Pacific Islander students, our African American students, American Indian, all rated the school environment favorably. But it was significantly lower in cultural awareness and diversity. Here's what's unique about that. Cultural diversity diversity and inclusion served as our highest performing area. Cultural awareness served as our biggest increase out of all of the categories that we assessed. But when we disaggregate the data, what we find is that students of color had a tendency to rate those two areas a little bit lower, although overall we did see an improvement in that area. And a fewer percentage of Hispanic, Black, and Pacific Islander students rated the school climate favorably when they're compared to all of their other respondents. So because this is such a big chart, I encourage the board to spend some time looking at those pluses and minuses. We didn't see as huge of a significant area as we did in that confidentiality protected. I cannot tell you who those students are, but I will tell you we also disaggregated this data by language, when students self-selected their own language. And what we saw is a significant disparity in those students who speak Tagalog and Vietnamese. So that's definitely something that we want to unpack a little bit further to understand what's happening there. And then finally, there's chronic absenteeism. And sadly, I have to report that we are seeing an increase in chronic absenteeism. But I will also say, not that this is an excuse or a caveat even, but we are coming out an area of COVID, and please be reminded that chronic absenteeism is any absenteeism for any reason. So you may see a little bit of a difference if we measure truancy here, but this is the measure that the state uses, so we're sticking to that. But we do see an increase across all groups. But most importantly, we see an even bigger increase for the students who are in our focus groups. So that's something that we are continuing to work on. And our folks at the site level and at the district level are really identifying some steps to take to address the level of chronic absenteeism in our district. I also want to just give some context and say this level of chronic absenteeism, while it seems really high here, when we look at it across the state, we are really not as bad as I've seen across the state overall. So just a little bit of context, those numbers look alarming because red does not look so good right there for some reason, but we do have some work to do there. And then we looked at special ed disproportionality. I want to point out that this is not the state level measure of significant disproportionality. This just looks at the proportion of students in each of the categories, Black, African American, and Pacific Islanders, who are identified as special ed as part of the larger population. And we find that 66% of that population is identified as a student with a specific learning disability when they only make up 18% of the whole school enrollment. So no matter what you feel about how often and how swift we need to get students to referral for eligibility, those statistics just don't make sense in terms of the percentage of students who have a true disability versus those who may need just some additional support and help in the classroom. However, the good news is that disproportionality is steadily declining. If you read the full report, you'll see that we started out several years ago, 2019, and about 8 times the ratio for students of color. We have whittled that down to about 1.7, which is within the kind of both national and state range for disproportionality. So we are trending in the right direction, which is good news for us. And then finally, under goal 3, we looked at disproportionality and discipline. Another caveat here, we have one of the lowest suspension rates of any district I have ever seen, something like 1% or less. However, when we disaggregate the data, we do see that students of color have a tendency to be those students who are suspended from school. So there is a rate of disproportionality there. But again, that beautiful red color shows us that we are declining in that area, so we are making some progress. And 3 out of the 4 groups that we looked at in terms of our focus groups decline, even though it wasn't enough of a decline to meet the 3% benchmark for progress, we are still seeing that we're trending in the right direction. And finally, goal 4, which is something really personal, not that all of it's personal to me actually, but multi-tiered interventions and supports is something we've been talking about for some time. But we've had some difficulty really getting it started up in a systemic way. We have finally established a district-level MTSS team. We are working with site-level MTSS teams to ensure that we are creating systems that provide an early warning indicator and response to students when we identify needs. We are extremely proud that we have finally purchased our first MTSS platform, which allows us to look at data of students across their school career so that teams can collaborate together on a specific student. They can see all of that student's data in one place. They get notified when we need to take a closer look at a student. And it also provides a forum for us to actually develop plans with it and track those plans within a system. So when a student moves on to the middle school, there's an opportunity to see how that student did in the previous year or at the previous school so that we can continue those supports and we don't have to start from the beginning. So that platform will be helping us out. And we're also going to be developing an MTSS playbook, which we've already started with the team that we're working with. So we are making some strides there. We got a little bit of a slow start, but it is definitely some progress made in that area. And finally, for me, one of the most important areas is how do we really build educator and leadership efficacy around this work, with the understanding that our efforts are about all students. And while we focus on the focus groups, this equity work around the SWIFT plan is about ensuring that every student in our district, no matter what their background is, gets the support they need, but that we are paying special attention to those students who need us the most. So when I tell you that leaders in this district are taking up the charge and they are actually engaging in activities in their own school site, driven by them, not driven by the district office, but just supported and resourced by the district office. We are making great gains in that area, and you can see that in some of the school climate data with our students saying, hey, diversity and inclusion, 81%, that's a check. To give you an example of some of the things happening, I was just over at Pali and talking to them about some of the work they're doing. They are actually engaging students in the work. They are holding podcasts. They are recording students, giving their feedback about the work that's going on. So amazing things are happening there. I don't even have to tell you about Gunn because we know all of the really great things that are happening at Gunn around equity. And now our elementary and our middle school sites are starting to really step up and do some really engaging things around equity. And finally, I'll leave with this. One of the things that we have not started doing yet is really checking our system for those equity markers, identifying and knowing what they are. So we are right now piloting an equity rubric that I hope will eventually get some teacher feedback on how this can become a principal walkthrough tool so that principals know what to look for when they are walking into classrooms, but teachers also know what they're looking for and understand what they are. So our equity-focused professional development is growing every day. Teachers have opportunities. I think I'm probably kicking out an opportunity at least once a month for something for a teacher to engage in. But I'm really proud of our leaders in this district and our schools in this work. We don't have one equity leader. We have many equity leaders in this district now. Thank you. That's all.
Am I beaming? I'm beaming. We have 2 public comments before we go to board comments. If we start with Stephen Davis and then Edith Cohen on Zoom. 2 whole minutes.
Thank you very much for that excellent report. It's very frustrating as a regular person trying to deal with the dashboard in the school data because I've tried to figure it out, and it seems the way that state represents our data is like a lazy assistant principal who doesn't really want to do their job, and as opposed to trying to make the state excellent. So you have to really work to pull the data out and really get what you need out of it. Coincidentally, and it was coincidentally, I'd actually put together an analysis of the special ed part of the program. And some things I did was a little different that you did, which is I looked at the performance gaps between the general ed and the special ed students. And in both English language arts and mathematics, and I looked kind of across the pandemic because that was my choice, because that's what I got paid to do. I looked from 2019 to 2022, and in both of those time periods, the performance gaps between general ed students and special ed students grew. And you can do that both through the district and with California to see if the directionality is going the same way, to see, to get a sense of what the numbers mean. Perhaps the saddest number was the suspension data, which Palo Alto is very low and went down from across that time period. But, and even suspensions for disabled students went down across that time period. But the proportion of disabled students, and I will say I was kind of appalled, is now 46.75% of our suspensions are disabled students, and that's real disproportionality. I provided the data for you because I care about doing better. There is good data available, and we can do something with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Edith Cohen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Nice comments by the prior speaker. I think PAUSD should really work on use of data. But what I wanted to talk about now is one goal of SWIFT. One of the stated goals is to prepare all students for college readiness. And basically, I'm concerned that with the very, very limited middle school program, we're actually moving away from that. That the kids that are actually at risk of not reaching college readiness are getting further away from that goal. So first, PAUSD eliminated Algebra 2 as a graduation requirement, aligned its math graduation requirements with the minimum required by the state. That means that only algebra and geometry are now required for graduation, but this is not college readiness. So now for college readiness, you actually need to take Algebra 2. To take Algebra 2, you need to be proficient in the standards of Algebra 1. But what is happening now in middle school is this theater. All 8th graders are taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade, but 20% of them are not even ready with the 7th grade standards. That means that they are like 2 years of standards behind what is needed for Algebra 1. And this disproportionately impacts our disadvantaged students that are doing worse objectively, as I said before, than at other districts, even though they are placed on Algebra 1. 70% of them are actually below 7th grade standards when they are rolled into Algebra 1. So now what are you going to do? Are you going to pass these kids? If you pass these kids, you're dead-ending them. They are almost done with the math graduation.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Okay, colleagues. I think that, yes, I mean, I've said that a lot today. You can email the rest of your comments to board@pausd.org. I think that Dr. Austin sort of queued it up for us nicely that, of course, you can make a comment about the content itself, because I think this is, we've been working on and waiting for this for a very, very long time. And it's really exciting to see a lot of what's there and the work we have ahead. But the real ask for tonight is that by the end of this conversation, Ms. Conaway and staff have a better sense of exactly going forward. We've asked for this sort of equity report card. And what should that look like? Should that be this in-depth? Are there things that are not there that you want to see? Are there things that you think you don't need to see? Do you think seeing them in a different way would be more helpful? And hopefully at the end of this conversation, we can give specific direction to staff so they'll know in the future what we're looking for. And I assume we're not all looking for exactly the same thing. So let's just get started and have a conversation. Do you want to start?
I just wanted to start by thanking you and staff and board members and teachers and everyone who, for your work in this. And what I can see, I went through the whole packet, and what I really focused on is what early interventions we're doing and need-based interventions. And I'm so proud to be part of this district that has so many interventions at each school. And I wanted to do a shout out to Dream Catchers as well as one of the interventions we're so lucky to have. And it was great to see that just that we are improving in these different ways. The only thing I might be interested in seeing is just more multi-year data to give more like 2019, just to give a little bit more historical data pre-COVID would be helpful. in some of the comparisons. That was my first. Let me just see if there was anything else. And one quick question I had, and this is just kind of like a clarifying question, is the definition of chronic absenteeism. I just think that might be helpful to know. Yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. Chronic absenteeism is 10%, absence of 10% of the school days.
Okay. And I think it would be interesting to see if we pulled the excused absences out. I think that number would be more meaningful, at least for me, so that would be helpful to pull out, to see both, but to pull that out. And yeah, I just, like, the key accomplishments that I saw here, the focus, the multi-level focus, indicate what can happen when equity is the focus, and by disaggregating the data, we saw other focus groups that weren't part of the original focus group, and that's like the real work and why this is so important. So that was all. Thank you.
Ms. Slademaric?
Yeah, I just first want to say a huge thank you to staff for this report, but also for all the work that's reflected in the report, which is happening throughout the district at every level, as you mentioned. I know we want to talk about specifics, but I just want to detour for a minute and talk about community values, because I've been thinking a lot about community values lately. Kind of like what moves us, what outrages us, what do we celebrate? Is it even possible to identify shared community values in a city like ours? And can they really unify us, or do they just kind of drive us into our respective corners? When my oldest daughter was in 5th grade, I attended a civil rights assembly that was put on by all the 5th graders at Addison. And at one point, all the kids were singing "We Shall Overcome." And on one side of my daughter was a child who I knew to be intermittently unhoused. And on the other side of my daughter was a child I knew, whose parents I knew to be depending on the stock market that day, either billionaires or close to it. And in addition to this, in this one classroom alone, there were at least half a dozen countries of origin and first languages represented. And I just kept thinking the whole time these kids were singing, how does this teacher do it? Like, how does she navigate all this? The staggering diversity of life experiences and perspectives of the students in her class and of their parents. Last meeting, Ms. Siegel talked at length about the value of community engagement. She read from the PAUSD promise. I don't think there was one person in the room that night or tonight, or working in this office or anywhere in this district, who does not share the values expressed in the promise and try their very best to live up to them every day. But we heard from many members of the Ohlone community who passionately feel that we have failed to do so. Common ground, shared values, these are easy enough to find in kind of lofty ideas and vague aspirations, but the specifics of how to translate those ideas into practice is where things always get sticky. Like they say, the devil's always in the details, right? So what does what I'm saying have to do with the SWIFT plan? Well, those are the details. Everyone can applaud cute kids reciting poems about Rosa Parks and singing "We Shall Overcome." But there is an oceanic distance between a feel-good civil rights assembly and educational justice. At our last board meeting, in addition to special education restructuring, staff reported on the middle of the year iReady assessment results, the third progress indicator of the Every Student Reads initiative. Those results, combined with the first two progress indicators, which were presented in September, represent the first time in the history of our school district, since before 1988, that we have made progress with closing the opportunity gap. Of course, we still have a long way to go, and we're doing better with some groups than with others. But progress has been made. Substantial, measurable, not just a statistical anomaly, progress. After decades of nothing, That is not just cause for celebration, it's cause for elation. It's an unequivocal win. At the very least, it's newsworthy. Except apparently, in this community, it is not. Newspapers didn't write about it. There was no celebration. There was no line of speakers at the meeting. There were no postings on social media. There was crickets. And this should not surprise any of us. We've spent decades failing the same groups of students over and over and over again, and this community has never been outraged. I just want to pause for a moment here to note that there is a small committed group of people that very much has been outraged forever. They've been yelling into the wind and showing up at board meetings and sounding the alarm and begging us to care about what was happening to so many students. But as far as general community outrage, nothing. So why should we expect a celebration now? To be clear, I don't need to be celebrated. And as much as I believe that all the educators responsible for doing what's never been done before should be, they are adults and they aren't in this profession for the glory. They will be okay. The reason celebration matters is because it communicates that these children matter, that they're worthy of our community's attention. So we're going to discuss the specifics of the report card. I just want to pause for a moment, though, and celebrate the fact that it exists, that for the first time ever, we're not just applying a retrospective lens to this problem, to use an analogy I've used before. We aren't just opening up the oven once a year when we get the CASPER scores and saying, oh, yep, the cake isn't baked yet. There's a board-approved plan now with specific metrics that we are monitoring regularly so that we can course correct in real time. And just one example of that is the secondary student performance report, which is on tonight as an information item. It shows improvement in inequitable distribution of Ds and Fs since this data last came to the board. That doesn't happen without the SWIFT plan, without digging into the details and moving beyond the kind of uncontroversially vague statements about how important it is to close the opportunity gap into the daunting and sobering and uncomfortable and frustratingly complex work of actually closing it. So thank you, Ms. Conway and Ms. Reynolds and everyone across the district who's doing this work every day. You deserve a party, but you aren't going to get one. Instead, we're going to focus on getting this report card right so it becomes foundational to this board's role of oversight. Because lamenting, yet accepting that certain groups of students fail to receive the most basic levels of education in our schools, let alone thrive, let alone excel, that can't be a value of a public school district, at least not this district, at least not anymore. So, sorry. I'm all right. Sorry to go on for so long. I do have specific comments, but maybe you better move on to other people. I need a minute.
Thank you, Ms. Ledermerck. Thank you. I think you said what has been going through a lot of our minds, and you said it very, very eloquently. And the fact that we made progress last time and didn't celebrate it anywhere in our community, newspapers, social media, anywhere, was heartbreaking. And I really appreciate you putting it out there like that. Thank you. Okay, now back to the structure. I think, Mr. Dropp, you had some comments.
Yeah,
That's a tough act to follow.
It is. It is. Being on that committee with Ms. Ledermerck last year, and getting that committee convened, I would say doing the work, but we didn't do the work. You did the work, but helping to guide the work. I've said before, but if there's been one thing that I'm most proud of our district for, and if there's one thing I can say, hey, I was able to put my thumb on the scale of something, it was the creation of this committee and setting in motion the work that has now produced an incredibly detailed report and a means of measuring. Similar to Ms. Ledermerck's comments, like everybody goes to see the top of the Empire State Building, right? Nobody ever goes to tour like the sub-basement where the foundations are and the columns there that are keeping the whole thing up. Nobody does, because it's not sexy, right? It's great and amazing to be able to say, hey, country, look at this. Our 8th graders can take geometry. It's fine. But if we're doing that at the expense of the foundation, then we're building a crumbling structure. And eventually it's going to fall down. And in fact, it has. And that's why we are where we are, because it's decades on decades of exactly that, of pursuing a higher and higher ceiling at the expense of a floor. And it's not easy to build a floor, but I've said this and my colleagues have said this, but if given a choice in a vote to vote between building the floor, filling in the gaps, and raising the ceiling, I'm going to vote for the floor every time. And we say it's not mutually exclusive, but in some cases it is. In some cases it's an issue of prioritization. We have to prioritize the floor because we are a public school district. We're not a private school. And if folks want higher ceilings at the expense of the floors, then maybe there are private schools out there that could do that. And that's not us. We're a public school district. We have a duty. We have a fundamental duty to serve all of our students. And serving all of our students doesn't mean doing what each student is going to want. It means serving all of our students. It means building the floor. So thank you for the work that's gone into this. It is, I think, significant. I mean, it's like, that's too small of a word for it. The detail on it is amazing. And I will talk about one piece that I mean, it's just so good. But here's the thing that I would make it even better is right now the snapshot gives me a good sense of where we are now, which is great. And I know goal 4 and 5 aren't yet reflected in that 1-page snapshot or the 2-page snapshot, but they are in the longer piece. As I think about where we're going to be in 5 years or in 10 years, or the next board that none of us are going to be on, it would be great for that board to be able to see, like, here is the year-over-year report of where we were and where we are. And there are ways to do it, I think, in the framework that's been set forth here. But I wonder if my colleagues have ideas on, an even shorter, even snappier snapshot. For example, goal 4 and 5 are, I think, harder to measure in a really succinct way, right? Because there are a lot of different data sources, qualitative data sources, and you can't really summarize those in percentages or numbers. How do you summarize that? And I'd be interested to hear what my colleagues think, but if you can devise for example, a scale and say, we're doing a 6. I mean, we're doing a 6 on this right now. And then in the longer version has like, here's why we're doing a 6, and here are all the things. Here's what a 10 would be. Here's what a 1 would be. We're at a 6. Then looking at the snapshot, I could see, oh, great. In 2023, we were doing a 6 here. In 2025, we're doing an 8. And then I go into the longer one and say, okay, here's the rubric on which those numbers are being measured. Here's why we're doing an 8 as opposed to a 6. But if that snapshot says, okay, we're going up or we're going down, then yeah, it's going to require a little bit of discretion on staff's part and a little bit of sort of fidelity to objectivism, which can be difficult. But I think that would produce a result that would give us in the community a real sense of where things are going up and down. And you still have the great detailed, secondary SHIA report that tells us, okay, here's why the numbers are what they are. So honestly, that's like the only area I think this could be improved on is the creation or the manipulation of the snapshot to become even snappier so that it can be turned into a year-over-year thing that we can just look at and say, okay, here's where we're trending and why.
Thank you. Mr. Collins? Nothing. Okay. Do you have anything else? You have other. I know. I'm like excited to call on our students. So let me call on them and then I'll come back to you and then I'll go. Yeah. This directly impacts 2 of our students, are right here to talk to us about it. So we want to hear what you have to say.
I don't have a monologue or anything. I apologize. Okay. I think
we don't expect it of you.
I think what you guys said was great, and I felt very inspired by it. I think this is just definitely very exciting, as it's the first SWIFT report. I remember seeing that. I was like, oh my gosh, it's the very first one. I can't believe I get to be a part of that. And it's especially unfortunate that I'm a senior and graduating and I won't get a B, on here seeing the future ones, but I'll definitely hop on the agendas just to see it. But I think it's really great to see this change happening in my school career, especially since I think, like what you're saying, Ms. Loudon-Myrick, it is hard that we see the celebration for these type of things. And, for good reason. I know a lot of students around me are struggling in terms of equity or mental health, and it is really easy to see the criticism and really easy to see disparities because they do exist. But I think seeing this progress is very gratifying, and it makes me very hopeful that change can happen, as difficult or hopeless as it can be at times. I did want to ask something specific. I think I might just have not caught this in the presentation, but I wanted to ask about what the specific concerning patterns that were noted for Vietnamese and Filipino students. I was really happy to see that the Asian American population was split into specific ethnic groups, since it is a very, very large population that has a lot of nuances throughout different groups and their experiences. And I just wanted to ask a little bit more about that. But before I open up to the question, I just wanted to say I really appreciate that distinction. And I hope that we do definitely focus on specific ethnic groups as needed, since Asian Americans aren't all lumped into one.
I'd be happy to answer that. We looked very closely at two things, at the specific larger categories of school environment as it relates to equity, and we also looked at those specific questions and where we were seeing some differences. I will say at the secondary level, if the student identified themselves as Vietnamese and also from a Vietnamese home, we were seeing things like a negative 23 to 30 point difference in the percentage of students who responded favorably. So it's a stark difference. So it's definitely giving us pause and thinking about what we can do to ensure that we're meeting the needs of those students as well.
Mr. Pan, any comments or questions?
Yeah, no, I think like everyone kind of already talks about how impactful and beneficial this whole report was. But I just want to say, like, whatever, like, all the board members said was very, very inspiring. Like, I feel like because we had to, there in the community right now, there's a lot of conversation about excelling in math. But I just think that a lot of the people that aren't mentioned are the people represented in this report. And I, like, definitely agree that it's so important to, like, focus on the foundation first. And I also find it very, very like surprising that it is not celebrated as often, like these reports aren't. And parents that are upset that their students can't get a higher level in math are coming here and speaking for 2 minutes just to complain about that. And these serious issues aren't raised more often. And I think that it's just very special to see the board members talking about it more often. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that at the time that this was a typical comment for me, I think it was only Mr. Collins that was on the board, but remember we'd go, this is the work. this is the work. And I started looking through this and thinking, gosh, if you had told me 4 or 5 years ago that we would have a SWIFT plan, we would have a detailed report, we would have a leadership team that reflects the diversity of our district, that we would have community members that come every time and comment about these issues that are inequitable and that want to see it get better. And like Ms. Loudon-Myrick said, I would like it if we all showed up. Wouldn't it be nice if we had an hour of public comment, because there were people pushing us on really closing this gap that for decades and decades and decades hasn't moved. And it's really exciting to see this. And so the question becomes, what is a sustainable way for us to see this work on a regular basis? Which I think is exactly the question that you asked an hour ago. So I don't know if we're much closer to answering it, but I do think that it struck me as I read it that many of the parts of this, we see some other way. Right, that if we're talking about the CASP scores or what's on the dashboard, we get a report every year on that. Even if we were looking on the academic achievement, if we were looking at our iReady scores or, looking at BAS comparisons or whatever it is that we're using as our local measure. We also see those other times. So important, and yet it has me start to, it's sort of when we first started talking about equity and does it stand alone or does it weave within everyone else? If it's someone else's job, then it's that person's job and not everyone's job. But if it weaves to everyone else, then people can pass it off. And I feel like that's sort of where we are with the report. Like, does all this stuff go together in a report and then we tease out a section of it at different times of the year? Or if we see it another time, it doesn't need to be in this, and this is the way to just get the summary of the things that we don't see otherwise. And I mean, for me, Mr. Drop mentioned those last two, right? Well, it wasn't even, for me, it's not even the two. Wait, let me look. It might be. Right, MTSS and the leadership, the equity literacy. But then also school climate. And school climate was, back in the day when we started doing this work, we were looking at, okay, scores are different. How can we get the scores up? Tutors, extra time, dream catchers, right? All those things are important too, but they were missing 3, 4, and 5. And there's been long talk of MTSS, and I see some people out there that have been advocating for MTSS for a long time. But when we really started to move on this, we had many of our employees, many of our certificated staff and our classified staff coming and saying, yes, please do this work. We've been doing this work in our own classrooms, or we've been wanting this work to happen on our sites, or at our site we are doing this. And you manage to pull it all together. There's so much work happening by so many people here and at sites and students. And they're asking for it, right? The students want it. So I think when I think about what I want to see, it could be something like making it, on a scale or a pluses and minuses. This has gone up, this has gone down, with details. But, at first my comment was this is just too much to always put together. And maybe it's too much to put together in one document, but all this work is happening. You're all doing it all, right? Whether we take it from, hey, here's our CASP report, and here's our, we did our SEL survey, and here are the results for that, and here's the work that our equity literacy leadership group is doing. All the work is happening. So I care less about where we see it, but I do think seeing really a 1 or 2 pager that might say, with just pluses and minuses or numbers. I mean, heck, I want to see on a scale of 1 to 10, what does 10 look like exactly? And I think we know what 10 looks like. It's the, demographics don't predict success, and you can't tell what someone's demographics are by looking at the outcomes. And so that's our 10, and our 1 is where we were way back. So where are we along the way? I mean, and that might be a way to do it. I don't know if that's a reasonable way to do it. Ms. Loudon-Merrick had mentioned, I'm referring to pluses and minuses, and she didn't. Piece of paper. I drew it for her. And at first I said, I don't think that does it, but maybe it does, where you said we've made progress, but not 3%, or we've lost progress. Maybe they're just pluses and minuses. The details are going to be there for us to dive into, but just a snapshot of this has gone up, this has gone down, kind of with your blues and dark blues and light blues, although maybe different colors if it's gained than if it's lost ground. So I think what I've heard so far from the board is we don't care so much what's on what you include in here, as long as we're seeing it somewhere along the year, and this report card is a compact document that gets at these things that either we're not seeing anywhere else or that are just a very brief summary of what we're seeing in other places. I don't know if that helps though.
Well, I want to clarify one thing. First of all, this exact report that you prepared, I would like to see this once a year. I feel like then there's maybe more times during the year that we're seeing the snapshot. But to me, there's so much value in pulling it all together.
Like a big overall.
She's gonna faint.
Not at all.
But
that would be, might.
But yeah, I was like, ah. But I've sort of always envisioned an annual State of the Union,
picture, right.
And then snapshots quarterly. I mean, 3 times a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, however. And so she's talking about pluses and minuses. I literally took the chart that you created with the 5 goals, right? So there's the 5 goals in the chart, and then there's the metrics listed. And I imagined like for each it's 1 page, for each metric, a plus or a minus. Like we went up, we went down. And then Jennifer said, what if some go up, some get down? I'm like, then plus/minus. Like, just stop being, like, yeah, but just however you want to do it. So then it's like a 1 page, so we literally looking at green pluses and red minuses for a bunch of metrics. But then attached to that is the appendices. So like the chart for the first metric, the chart for the second metric. And maybe when we're getting to the 4 and 5, instead of a chart, you have a narrative. Like maybe you write a paragraph, right? But just so then if we want to dig into the charts, we can. To Mr. Drop's point, if we just want to look at the pluses, we can just look at the pluses. But that would be my idea of like, hopefully something that you could actually do 3 or 4 times a year. Quarterly feels like a lot since we're only in here 9 months. So twice
10.
a year, 3
We're here
times a
10
year.
months,
Yeah,
but-
and if you don't want to do this whole report every year, that's fine.
Well, so Dr. Austin, I think
But I
you're going to
love
hate
it.
this answer, but I think what I'm hearing, tell me, Mr. Drop, if you agree with me. The Board Equity Oversight Committee is meeting soon, and that is you and me this year. And you have been hearing this feedback, and I have been hearing this feedback, and you have in your mind kind of what you'd like to see, I have what I'd like to see. And unless someone has not said something yet that they'd like to add, which you may be, okay, then I kind of feel like we have to interpret what was set up here at the next Board Equity Oversight Committee meeting and try to hammer it home,
Have
bring it
enough,
home.
Ms. Conway, and don't just be polite. Say, no, I do not have enough.
I'm not sure I know the board's decision on this, but I look forward to hearing more on
Yes, I'm
SMBR.
so diplomatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it falls within the role of the committee to continue with refining the tool.
And taking the input we just heard here. Yep. And I mean, this is a fantastic report. And so somewhere in between a 1-pager and this, and where we think we're to go with it, I think that's exactly the role of the
And
committee.
more than once a year.
So basically what you wanted us to do tonight, we are kind of bumping, because I don't know that, just like we try not to write policy from the dais, I think trying to really hone this in from the dais is not so productive. I think it's gonna be really hard to do. So that's okay with you? Yep. Is that okay with you?
Yeah,
Yes, that's okay
didn't
with
even
you.
have any comments. I just want to sit here listening to us talk.
Can I just comment on the process?
Yeah.
I mean, the board shouldn't write the tool, the staff should write the tool.
Right.
The board should give input, the staff should do what they do. Then, I mean, because otherwise, not only should we not be writing from the dais, we shouldn't be writing in committee. Staff, this is staff's work, so let them do their work.
Yeah, and I think, well, I mean, staff did this work, and I think the question is that Dr. Austin had for us was how to make this a more manageable task without losing the stuff that you really want to see. So Mr. Darup and I will continue to give feedback on, no, I think it's important that we really see this or not. So like you said, the iterative process will continue as staff puts forward what they think is important, and we can ask for some adaptations so that it's more transparent or easier to digest or easier to celebrate.
I would just, yes, it's all fine. I would just say, if I recapped, this is our problem in bringing the report back in a way that we feel good about and that future boards and staff can replicate. I heard everything from we need the narratives, it's really important, it fills in all the gaps, to we need a snappier snapshot. And when you just, we can laugh about that, but those are so different that we're having trouble. But I do think when we get to this subcommittee, we're gonna be fine.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think if anything, it's worth sometime this spring, just sort of bringing back, hey, here's what the committee's coming up with. Does this meet your needs as other board members? So that by the end of the school year, hopefully, we know that going into the next years, we know what it is that we're gonna be looking for and wanting. So that we've got it really set in stone, that this board that like helped shepherd it, to happen, we can make it a set expectation, while we're still here. Okay, yes? Yeah. Okay, looking ahead, it is 8:24. We have 2 staff reports and some info items. I am inclined to power ahead, but I'm asking my colleagues, yes?
I'm gonna step out.
Great, awesome.
You either power ahead or no.
Okay, all right, we're gonna move on to 7A, our English Learner Program update.
All right, before we go on to A and B, I'll just tell all of our presenters that you will be judged, and you have 7 minutes. make them amazing. Kind of joking, but we have some really exciting information on the next two items. Not, first the EL update, and then second, dyslexia and struggling readers, both worthy of some time tonight. And we're going to kick it off with Mr. Lopez, who's going to frame up the first item.
All right, thank you, Dr. Austin. So this evening, Ms. Shen Lawrenson, our English learner program TOSA, and I will provide an update on our EL program along with some great news on the progress that our students are making. In California, a student is designated as an English learner when their family indicates that the family speaks another language other than English at home, and the student scores on the LPAC as novice or intermediate English learner. Currently, we have in service 947 students with six languages, having the largest number of students in Spanish, Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, Russian, and Hebrew. And we also provide primary language tutoring services to our students that need it. At the elementary level, all of our English learner students are in mainstream classes, and our English learner specialists provide coaching for teachers or team teaching to support our students who support with Tier 1 strategies and Tier 2 support in groups. At the secondary level, our students are supported via designated EL courses and academic language development, or ALD, support at both middle schools and high schools. Also, our English language coordinators support our students in mainstream, support our teachers, in mainstream classes with Tier 1 strategies to help students become proficient in English. And also, at all levels, the summative LPAC test is administered annually as a progress monitoring tool. And now we're going to hand it over to Ms. Shen Lawrenson.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. I'm going to share the English learner progress, which is available in the California School Dashboard. The California School Dashboard provides parents and educators with meaningful information on school and district progress so they can participate in decisions to improve student learning. One of the 6 state indicators is the English learner progress. I am happy to present to you tonight that the English learners are overall doing very well in Palo Alto. So when examining the English learner progress indicator, or ELPI, it measures the English learner's progress using the English Language Proficiency Assessment for California, also known as the LPAC. The ELPI status uses summative LPAC assessment results from the 2020 to 21 and 21-22 school years to measure progress of the EL students who are making progress towards the English language proficiency. The proficiency levels are divided into 4 levels. For the purpose of state accountability, the 4 LP levels are divided into 6 LP levels, which are 1, 2 low, 2 high, 3 low, 3 high, and 4 to determine whether students made progress toward English language proficiency. The LP reports student performances for the EL student group only. On this slide, we're looking at that the LP shows the percentage of current English learners making progress towards English language proficiency or maintaining the highest level on the LPAC. In Palo Alto, 531 English learners in grades 1 through 12 are included in the LP as they have summative LPAC results from the 2020 to 21 and 21-22 school years. Overall, PAUSD EL students are performing at the high level with 63.1% making progress toward English language proficiency or maintaining the highest level on the LPAC. 47.5% progressed at least one LP level from 2021 to 2022, 15.6% maintained at the LP level 4, which is the highest LP level, 22.2% maintained at the LP level 1, 2 low, 2 high, 3 low, or 3 high, and 14.7% decreased at least one LP level. For comparison, the state is at the medium level with 50.3% making progress towards English proficiency. So looking at the average student academic performance on the SBAC, the dashboard also provides expanded ELA and math performance reports specifically for the English learner student group. And as a whole, PAUSD is very high in English language arts
and the English learners were considered in a high group. Additional data are provided for EL students, reclassified EL students, and English-only students. PAUSD ELs performed 37.9 points below standard, and at the state level, ELs performed at 98.5 points below standard. PAUSD performed, reclassified English learners performed at 56.3 above standard, and at the state level, they performed at 3.4 above standard. So you can see that PAUSD EL students are still doing above what the state standards are at this time. The math data, which I'm going to move on to, is also further disaggregates EL student group data by comparing current EL students, reclassified EL students, English-only students in this additional report. And again, PAUSD scored very high in math, and English learners were in the high group. PAUSD ELs performed 38 points below standard, and at the state level, ELs performed 122.3 points below standard. PAUSD reclassified ELs performed 51.1 points above standard, and at the state level, they performed 39.3 below standard. So in the spirit of celebration, as you were all speaking of earlier, English learners are doing very well academically and making progress towards English proficiency in PAUSD. However, we're always looking to improve and close the gap. And as a next step, our district has formed an EL ad hoc committee, and the charge is to evaluate the current EL program and identify strengths and areas of improvement for better support, to better support all students at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, the staff report. Does anybody have any questions? Mr. Collins? Oh, okay. Mr. Collins, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thanks for that report. I turn my thing on. Thanks for that report. I don't recall seeing this report in the past, so I think it's good that we did. And I know the state has done some work to elevate the visibility of EL performance on the dashboard, and so that's good. One thing a cautionary note, while those our numbers, you mentioned a number of times that our numbers are higher than the state averages. The population of English learners in Palo Alto is quite, like Palo Alto itself, is quite different from the typical population of English learners across California. In particular, they tend to be much more affluent, much higher parental educational attainment, and I think those are probably the two main factors. You go to many districts in the Central Valley, in Southern California, even around here, and the vast majority, a large majority of the English learner population is Spanish-speaking first-generation immigrants. That's much less so in Palo Alto. So I guess I'd be cautious. If we wanted them, I was actually looking at the LPAC portal and seeing, we don't have enough. We have small enough cohorts for most of the subgroups that we don't report to a very fine level of detail. But I do think we should be cautious about feeling too positive about our results because we're exceeding state averages, because the demographics of our families are quite a bit above state averages. And kind of like with our ESRI initiative, maybe focus in on some of the groups that we know are historically low performing. I mean, for instance, I think you said, if I was reading the numbers right, about a third of the students didn't make one level progress on the, I don't know what we call the scale. We just call that the LPAC scale. What do we call that?
The LP scale.
The LP scale. So like 30-something% did not make progress. So for me, while it's good that 67% did or 60-something% did, and I'm happy about that. I'm more concerned about the ones who did not. And I would like, I'd be more focused on kind of what's going on with that group and how do we make that group more successful, even though we're already well above the state average. I think we need to set a higher bar given the students that we're given to work with. That's not a criticism of this report. I think the report is great. I think, it's important that we talk about this, and we obviously haven't before, so I want to celebrate that. But I do think, we got to be careful. In the past, I recall some ghosts of board meetings long ago. I remember this board meeting 10 years ago where there was some back padding about the performance of the district in this particular category. And as I later learned more about it, it made me realize we were kind of like fooling ourselves a little bit about how well we were doing, because we were taking credit for essentially the contribution of many of our families. So something to just keep in mind, but I think this is it'd be great if we can see this report again. So thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. As a former ELD department chair, former ELD teacher, seeing this report, the fact that we as a district are choosing to have an ad hoc committee to focus on our English language learners is very significant. And I also just wanted to encourage the ad hoc committee. There's the test scores, and that's important too. One thing we did at my former district was found ways to celebrate our English language learners who often might not get the recognition of the big STEM award or this or that. And so at our former district, the ELD department chairs got together and formed an ELD speech contest. So it was a speech contest for just the English language learners, and they would compete at the school, they would compete district-wide and have board members come and judge, and the mayor and city council. So just looking, it's one of our PAUSD promises is celebrating others, but looking for ways of celebrating. I want to celebrate the progress we saw here today and thinking about how to celebrate the students at the site and at the district level.
Do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, my only comment was just 175 other children, that list of the languages, and then hundreds, and I just think, oh my God, those poor kids. There's probably like one of them in the district, and they don't, how lonely they must be. So just thank you for having your arms around them.
No, thank you for this report and for the progress. And again, just elevating it is making us pay attention to it and really identify how we can get better at it. So thank you. Exciting to see more progress. Did you guys have anything you want to say? Okay, thank you. So next is 7B, and we do have 2 comments on it after staff presents.
All right, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. Tonight, Ms. Reynolds and I are sharing the support students received when they are identified as struggling with reading or for having markers with dyslexia. We will also share data from the first 2 administrations of the iReady Dyslexia Screener, which is part of the iReady assessment that is given to K-3 students 3 times a year. Next slide, please. You got it?
She's trying. She's trying.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. This timeline represents some of the more significant milestones in the work supporting our struggling readers since the publishing of the California Dyslexia Guidelines in 2017. Complementing this timeline, which I think you may have seen, are the numerous comprehensive attachments that illustrates Palo Alto's commitment to all students receiving the instruction and accommodations needed to read at grade level by the end of 3rd grade. I would now like to turn over the presentation to Ms. Reynolds.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Good evening, board members. Elementary sites administered the Shaywitz Dyslexia Screener annually from 2019 through 2021. In 2019, the Shaywitz Screener was the only screener available. The process required teachers to answer several questions based on observations of each student's reading behaviors. The Shaywitz Dyslexia Screener was subjective. During the 2021-22 school year, the TK-12 literacy team researched and vetted universal screeners for reading and dyslexia screeners for the elementary and secondary levels. And unfortunately, at the secondary level, we are still unable to find a dyslexia screener, but we continue to search. And following a mini pilot and reviewing the team's input, it was determined that the nationally normed, Common Core Standards aligned, iReady diagnostic reading assessment and embedded dyslexia screener provided objective and comprehensive information that, when triangulated with local assessments by classroom teachers, equipped them and their site teams with detailed information to deliver specific instruction, early intervention, and address potential reading difficulties promptly. Here we have the Shaywitz Screener information from 2019, 2020, and 2021. We have the number of students screened and then the number of students with markers for dyslexia. And we have the fall iReady dyslexia screener, number of students screened, and then the number of students with markers for dyslexia in fall and the winter results. And so one question might be, who is missing? Why do we have such different numbers? We have many students, over 500 students, and then we're down to 93 students with iReady. So that could be a question. What does the graph tell us? And one thing that we do recognize is that we have asked our reading specialists to look at other students, make sure that if there were students that we think might have markers, students that we do have concerns about who are at risk for reading difficulty, we are following our processes to make sure that we are providing the right intervention and support for those students. What's most important is recognizing that we have two completely different screeners, two different assessments, and that we want to catch students early and provide the right intervention and support for them. We have implemented the Orton-Gillingham methodology last year with teaching phonics instruction, which is an explicit, systematic, and multisensory way of teaching phonics in grades K through 3. This started in fall of 2021. This is particularly effective for students who are struggling with learning to read, students with markers for dyslexia, and students with dyslexia. So one question might be, could these lower numbers be a result of students responding to this type of systematic explicit phonics instruction? Or could there be other factors that we will uncover as we continue to administer this particular diagnostic assessment and use this new tool? The Shaywitz was administered once a year. Students will receive this screener every time we administer the iReady diagnostic reading assessment. So this will be ongoing and provide diagnostic information every time we administer it. So we get continuous ongoing information about our students, which is very important as we move forward. Here you see our elementary iReady middle of year diagnostic reading data for all students grades K through 5. And you can see students who are reading on or above grade level, 1 year below grade level, students 2 grade levels below, or 3 or more grade levels below. We also administered the iReady reading diagnostic assessment to our secondary students. And this was administered to a selected group of students, all 6th graders, all 9th graders, new secondary students, all English learners, students on the D and F list, and students who have an IEP or a 504 plan for reading. And we're doing this so we can gain more information about our students at the secondary level as we continue to work hard to provide the right types of supports to make sure that all students in PAUSD are reading and are college and career ready. We presented the elementary and secondary flow chart, which is on the next slide, at the January 18th, 2022 board meeting. This is an updated version with the new assessments and new information regarding a parent course that is available on Schoology. It's a Schoology group. And I'm going to take you through what might happen to a student at the elementary level in this flow chart. So if I am a 2nd grader, what would this mean for students and parents? If I were a 2nd grader identified as having markers for dyslexia, the school would take the following steps on this flow chart. The classroom teacher and reading specialist would review my iReady diagnostic reading results and local assessments to develop a plan with goals written specifically for my needs. My teacher will provide Tier 1 reading and small group instruction and monitor my progress. My teacher would discuss my results with the reading specialist. If it's determined that I need Tier 2 support outside of the classroom, my parents will give permission for me to work with the reading specialist on my personal goals in a small group. My parents will receive access to a Schoology group where they can learn more about the ways they can support me in my struggles with reading. My classroom teacher and the reading specialist will monitor my response to instruction through local assessments. After 6 to 8 weeks, my teacher and reading specialist will determine if I'm ready for new goals for further Tier 2 intervention, or if I have made enough progress to exit and continue receiving Tier 1 reading instruction in the classroom. Either way, my growth will continue to be monitored to ensure I make the necessary progress to read at grade level. A similar process is used at the secondary level. And you can see this at the elementary level, you can see the secondary flow chart. And secondary students also have access to assistive technology tools that are on the second part of this slide that are provided by classroom teachers, our literacy TOSAs and reading specialists at the secondary level, and education specialists work with our students at the secondary level on how to utilize these tools to support them in all of their core content classes. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. So as you can see, PAUSD has established procedures, processes, and committed district-wide for this work in supporting struggling readers. With the start of our work in 2017, including the dyslexia work group efforts between 2017 and 2019, our work has continued to evolve and improve our efforts. The Board Policy Review Committee requested staff to share its recommendation regarding developing a board policy on dyslexia. Staff does not recommend adopting a board policy nor an administrative regulation for dyslexia. The California School Board Association will not be recommending that school districts adopt a board policy of dyslexia, as it falls under the regulation for special education and is covered in Board Policy 6146.6. PAUSD has fully implemented the California Dyslexia Guidelines and established requirements for our work district-wide. It should also be noted that staff continues researching strategies, methodologies, assessments, and improved tools as they become available. Our work reflects shifts in curriculum, assessments, and implementations of best practices in supporting students with reading difficulties and with dyslexia. This work will continue to be a focus in years to come. That's it for our presentation. We'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. First, we have 2 public comments. We have Stephen Davis and then Kimberly Angley, both in person. We'll have 2 minutes, and I will try to keep track of the time. I've not been doing well tonight.
Have I been abusing your time? No. Okay. Thank you for this presentation on dyslexia. There are only 10 states in the United States that don't require dyslexia assessments. California, sadly, is one of them. It should be embarrassing to all of us. There is a bill in the Assembly, SB 691, to require them in the state. I would ask that this board make a resolution in support of that bill based upon our experience here. I would ask that we ask our state assembly person and senator to support the bill. And I would ask that we ask the CSBA to, for a change, support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimberly Angley. She's gearing up. 2 minutes.
Palo Alto CAC has advocated for students with dyslexia and SLDs, the most common disability for special education. Tonight's report clearly shows PAUSD has worked diligently and thoroughly since 2017 to implement the guidelines to scale. This district is an anomaly. It has implemented all the suggestions, including evidence-based instruction, MTSS, and universal screening without laws to mandate the work. CAC notes the flow charts say at any point an individual may request an evaluation to determine a disability. Important because students may need a more comprehensive assessment. And while the guidelines strongly support the use of MTSS, it shouldn't delay identification. We heard that California is one of 10 states without a law. The staff doesn't want to codify the practice because of CSBA. A law to legally mandate screening had bipartisan support, but it was opposed by the California Teachers Union and CSBA. So if PAUSD is to be an outlier or a leader, PAUSD has done great things for literacy with positive results for students with disabilities and gen ed. The district invested and is screening. Disproportionality in identification for Black and Hispanic students has declined. But it's foolhardy not to acknowledge strong opposition from influential decision makers and future hires who may not believe in things we're doing now. Illiteracy is a gen ed problem, and California ranks low. We should screen. Delays in remediating dyslexia take 4 times longer and cost 2 times more. The board policy cited doesn't address screening practices for dyslexia or identify how to instruct struggling readers, the top half of the flowchart. It's a policy for 504 identification. The word screen doesn't appear once. Although current staff is fully supportive, the absence of a policy doesn't guarantee that a future PAUSD will continue to screen. And this would return PAUSD to the inequitable position of random and delayed identification and instruction of students who are at risk. We celebrate the district staff and the teachers for taking
Thank you, Ms.
transformative
Henry.
actions to help students with dyslexia. I'll send the rest of my notes.
Thank you. You know where to send it, right? Okay, colleagues, comments, questions? Ms. Siegel?
I just, again, wanted to express thanks and gratitude for the hard work that our district is doing. And looking at the MTSS flow chart, it was so thorough and detailed, and I think that's really helpful for parents. When I was looking through the attachments, I saw that a 54-page handbook is available for parents, and I was just wondering if it can, like, will it be offered in different languages so all parents can access it, or if we haven't made a decision, just thinking about that, making sure it's offered in different languages. And I just wanted to say I think Melissa Baton-Castle would be very proud in this moment. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Rupp?
Yeah. You know, the one thing I wanted to add was, we've had a sort of a theme tonight, and I wanted to add to that.
Are you celebrating?
Well, I'm celebrating, of course, but I think the theme is really about building a foundation. And, you know, we started this with dyslexia. Dyslexia was the instigator. And thank you to the, you know, I know that the district staff are thankful of the recognition that the community has given today, because I know that the community was a great driver of this progress. And I'm thankful as well. Dyslexia was the way we got this work, sort of started in the way that it is now. The work has always been done, but dyslexia got us on this path. And now, as we look at the report and we look at how we're approaching this work, it's really dyslexia plus. It's all struggling readers. It's a great example of how, you know, building the floor for students for whom there are gaps helps to raise the floor for all students who could be struggling. And it's another great example of the reason why in this district it's so important for us to focus on building that floor, because we end up supporting not just those students whom we're targeting, but in fact, more students that perhaps we were struggling to find supports for in the past. So again, I celebrate this work and the outcomes, of course, and although there's more work to do, it's a great example of how the work we do in targeted areas to build a floor ends up being much greater than what was intended in the first place.
Ms. Latimer? No pressure.
I want to thank staff. Again, this is so comprehensive, and it is so impressive. I mean, it's easy to forget. I mean, there was like a pandemic, they got involved and stuff, but PAUSD really was at the forefront of taking the state guidelines and applying them to the work that we do. I think one very significant action was missing from the timeline, which was Ms. Reynolds assuming the role of Director of Literacy Instruction, because to me that was really indicative of kind of the shift away from the narrow focus on the nuts and bolts of learning and implementing the state guidelines to incorporating them into our district's foundational literacy work. which we've done, and that's really impressive, and we should be really proud of that. I do want to reiterate this sort of an analogy, sort of similar to what I said with the SWIFT plan. You know, the SWIFT plan, we got the board to sign off on that, so now it's going to require board action if we stop measuring those goals. It's going to require a new board to say we don't care about this anymore. And I think to kind of reiterate what Ms. Ng Lee said, my nervousness is that you can't guarantee that administration or this board is going to be as supportive of this work as everybody in this room is. And so I don't, if the bill at the state passes, then this may be a moot point. And I'm not saying that we need a board policy, but some way of memorializing the fact that we do screenings. And I don't know if that can go in the MTSS handbook. I don't know if there's a way that we can sort of write this somewhere so it would take a board to say we stop doing that. That would be my pitch, is somehow can we make it so it doesn't depend on the goodwill of people caring about this. And again, if the bill passes the state, then this may be moot. But I don't want to lose this progress that we've made. And then I just had a quick question to follow up, sort of, I think Ms. Siegel said, the Schoology course that's being developed, that's just for parents. This is going to be sort of it's just for parents of kids who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, am I right? Or is it for kids in tier 1? It sounded like maybe you were saying that too.
Well, it's for parents of students who are struggling with reading and dyslexia.
Okay.
With the complication of Schoology, we're offering it to those parents. However, any parent can go to the principal and say, can you give me the code so I can take the course? That is kind of where we landed, because it's hard to find a platform where hundreds of people, thousands of people can take the course at the same time.
Because I want to, and you'll remember, I have 2 elementary school kids, and I honestly don't remember. I think I remember getting a letter that said there's an email that said there's going to be an administration of iReady, right? I'm pretty sure we were notified of that. I just to delete all that stuff because it's been so many darn years with elementary school. Whatever,
yeah, it's one of our local assessments. We don't always notify you when we are giving our local assessments because it's universal. We're giving it to everyone.
But so I'm trying to put my head back in when I was a young parent and confused by everything having to do with education. And I think when you hear your kid's going to be assessed, right, even if there's just sort of something in an email that's like, we'll notify if there's a problem, and if you're interested, talk to your teacher, talk to your principal, there's this course you can find out. There's just sort of recognizing that parents don't, we all know, but a lot of parents don't know. And so to make it less scary, sort of walking them through the process a little bit.
Mr. Collins, anything? Student board reps?
I just wanted to ask one clarifying question to what one quick question, Jesse. In terms of, I am on the BPRC Committee, Board Policy Review Committee. And so in terms of board policy creation, et cetera, or AR, is that something we would discuss at a board policy future upcoming meeting?
This board would send it to BPRC if we wanted you to take it up.
And staff's recommending no policy, and I think, I don't think any of us are saying we need a policy. I'm just asking for memorializing the fact that we are going to do screenings.
So no comments from you guys. Okay, just really quickly, a few things. Thank you so much for all of this. And also thank you to some of the people sitting behind you who have been coming to the microphone for years and years and years. And I don't think anyone was ever against doing this work, but they were like, could you guys light a fire under, get going here? And here we are years later, and we have Ms. Reynolds in this role, working as a whole team to get this work done. And I had the same sentiment as Ms. Lettermerrick. If you don't recommend a policy, I don't know that it has to be a policy, but it in the same vein as the SWIFT plan, right? We need to somehow memorialize it so that as boards turn over and staff turns over, this is just this is what we do. We've seen something finally make a difference in both of these cases for the first time in forever, and we want to make sure that people that weren't here when they saw the before time aren't like, oh, this doesn't matter, right? No, we're on this. So I guess I encourage staff to continue to think about how we might memorialize that in a handbook or in a promise or in a plan somewhere. That's something other than a policy. It sounds like the opposition to the Senate bill is that it's an unfunded mandate, right? So that is sort of the kiss of death for a bill. I mean, when people start claiming that and organizing start rallying against it, it often does die on the Hill. But I guess we will see. In the meantime, I'd love us to find a way to memorialize it here. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, information items. Anybody want to talk about any of them, A through F? Yes.
We can
Oh,
go first.
students. Is that who you're pointing at, our students?
Best voice to listen to.
What have you got, Miss Sia?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a question about the secondary student performance report for the fall semester. I believe the question is directed at Mr. Lopez, but let me know if this is for someone else. I was reading through the process for giving no mark and no credit, and I just wanted to ask the difference between no mark and no credit, since at least from reading it, I was having a little bit of trouble seeing the difference.
As were the administrators at your high schools.
Just making sure the light was on. Yeah, thank you. So when I had the conversation with both of our principals, because both of these items, the no credit is being implemented at both of the sites. So the purpose for this to be added was to provide the students that instead of receiving an F, they would get the no credit instead, to give them the opportunity to either submit any makeup work or to have the opportunity to be reassessed as far as meet the standard that they were missing in order to get the passing grade in the actual class. So this was in lieu of receiving an F.
Does that answer your question? If it doesn't, you can...
I think I understand that part. I think I just didn't know the difference between no mark and no credit. Because I think is it that no mark you still get a credit for the class and that no credit you don't?
You know what, let me dig in a little bit deeper, because I want to make sure that both of our sites are implementing it correctly. So I'll get that information and get back to you.
Thank you. Mr. Panjumi? Ms. Siegel?
Interestingly enough, my first question was actually about the no mark versus no credit, because they looked very similar, and we just want to make sure across the district they're being used the same. And so I wanted clarification on that. The other things I had just noted, first of all, I wanted to thank the staff, because I saw that D's and F's went down. And I wanted to thank the staff, Learning Ally, Dream Catchers, and thank the teachers and the students. I noticed at Green and at JLS, the department that had the highest numbers of D's and F's is math. And the course that had the highest numbers of D's and F's was algebra, which now almost all 8th graders take. And I know that some classes are co-taught, and so I thought it would be interesting to see that breakdown, the classes that are co-taught. How do the D's and F's look if we don't have that? Because if it does look significantly different, we might want to discuss more, like whether it's co-teaching or adding an extra aid, if that model is truly helping. I couldn't see the breakdown on that. I'd also, like, when I was looking at it, it looks like more kids are struggling in that 8th grade class than 7th grade math. And so I'd want to have data from previous years to see how this cohort of kids did in math in 6th grade and 7th grade, to see if this cohort is generally struggling with math, or if there's something else at play in this 8th grade class. And then the other thing I had questions about was, I'm concerned that our Hispanic students at JLS and Green are getting D's and F's at much higher rates. And we've been celebrating a lot, but just to take note of that. And to make sure that we're doing interventions to target that population. The other thing I noticed was that at JLS, over twice as many boys are receiving D's and F's compared to girls. I couldn't find the gender breakdown for Green, but I would like to see that, just if we're seeing a trend, to take specific steps to reduce that. But overall, thank you so much. This was great to see, and the work that went into for each school to do a DNF report and break it down by all the different demographics was really helpful, so thank you.
Anyone else on this item? Okay, then I'll just say really quickly, since we're talking about it. Thank you for this report. I think it was really interesting, and it's a perfect example of how flipping the script gives you different information, right? We used to be looking at how many D's and F's, and now we're looking at how many A's, B's, and C's, and how many are not, and why. And I mean, I had some curiosity questions too, but I think that the most important part of this is that each of the sites see this data, and they're seeing which are the classes that are getting the most number of these grades, which are different from site to site, which is really interesting. So I am certain that the sites are looking at these data and doing whatever they think they should be doing to work with them, which is really the purpose of them, right? So thank you, and thanks to the staff for compiling them and acting on them.
Yeah, I want to add to that, actually. We gave some pretty tough feedback on this report to the high schools specifically about what are you doing? There's some race stuff going on here. And I appreciate that they really seem to take that seriously. They dug into it. I mean, there's more work to be done, but I appreciate the growth mindset with which they approached the feedback.
Okay. So if there's no other info items, anyone? No, at least not as of 3 minutes ago. Let's see. Nope, no more public comment, which gets us to board operations. Anybody have anything? I have a committee report. A committee report. You must be on city school liaison now.
I thought I would have a novel item and actually provide a committee report, since I asked for them often. The city school liaison committee met, I think, a week or so ago, which this year is council members Burton, Lithcott-Haynes, and Mr. Drop and myself. The committee spent most of its time trying to figure out what it should be doing. Those of you who have been on the committee know that this is a committee that doesn't have a clear agenda of action, unlike most of our other committees, which work with specific things. This one is mostly information sharing. There was some sentiment expressed that the committee should take more initiative to build and frame the relationship between the city and the district. And there may be future discussion of that at the committee's meetings. Speaking just for myself, I would say before the committee would take that on, I personally would want to see our board, make sure our board wanted us to do that and gave us guidance on and parameters on which to discuss that. I would hate to see the committee go off in a direction that was not consistent with the interest of the board. And I would frankly, personally want to see the same thing happen on the other side, because I don't want 2 council members out of 7 coming up with something that the rest of their colleagues are not, in fact, very interested in. That strikes me as not a very productive thing. But anyway, that is what we spend our time on at the City School Liaison Committee.
So we shouldn't answer that question right now.
And not agendized, but just informational.
Okay, great. Ms. Ledermerich, do you have anything? I'm just going to go down this way.
Not tonight.
Okay, Mr. Drop.
Mr. Collins covered it.
Okay, Ms. Siegel.
I'll speak quickly. I attended the Youth of the Year event at the Boys and Girls Club in East Palo Alto a few weeks ago with Robin Rice, the PTA president of both El Carmelo and JLS. And she and I reached out to the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club and PTAC Communications to collaborate on ways in which to get PAUSD students involved in Boys and Girls Club. And so PTAC will be sending an email encouraging PAUSD students ages 14 and up to volunteer at the Boys Club of East Palo Alto and or Redwood City. So look for that email. And then I also attended California School Boards Association annual legislative meeting last Saturday. Todd Collins was also in attendance. Presenters included state senators, county supervisors, assembly members, and the president of Children Now, a nonpartisan research, policy development, and advocacy organization, which takes a whole child approach. And it was interesting because it covers prenatal through age 26, so it was some really interesting data. And it was great to be reminded of key issues, not just facing our district, but also our county and our state. And I just feel honored to be a member of CSBA.
Just in board operations, I would say my builder hat. I feel like lately I've called out groups that need a lot of builder hats. I really like to try to narrow it down to one builder hat. But this time after reading the SWIFT report, I think every single person that comes to your equity, literacy, leadership committees and is really doing that work. I mean, obviously everyone has a hand in the equity, but the people that after a long day of teaching or administrating and that still then comes to an equity meeting and does really hard work that is sometimes really uncomfortable and is challenging, and you're probably going to get pushback on from somewhere, but engaging in that work on a regular basis. And my other hat goes to Ms. Ledermerich for saying some things that I think really needed to be said, to have us pause and look at what we celebrate and what we don't. Is that it? Okay, then this meeting is adjourned.
Okay, I have to wake up in